Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn, Monday Evening Dissident Dispatch. This is a special one, being that it is Memorial Day. We don't say happy Memorial Day, that's unseemly. It's not supposed to be a happy day, it's supposed to be a solemn day. We observe Memorial Day, we recognize it, and hopefully uh, show some gratitude for all of those who died in service to our country, regardless of whether we agree or not with the reasons they were sent to fight for us. We have an all volunteer military. And even when we didn't, they were drafted. So, we're talking about uh, people who have served, not knowing when they would be called to do so and when it would mean giving their life. So, I take this day very seriously. I come from a family where my grandfather fought in World War I and World War II, and he made it out of both alive, but was quite solemn on this day, thinking of his friends. And so I choose to do the same. You, of course, can do as you wish, but I do not uh, entwine the politics of my country necessarily with their service. They may have voted, they may not have, they may have agreed, they may not have, but they didn't shirk their duty either way. So, welcome, Eagle Brain. Thank you for being here. Before I get started, please like and share this broadcast so others can join us if they're around and not, having the rest of their day off to do other things. If you're not already a subscriber to the channel, please do subscribe. Hi, Ethan. Thank you. Um, it does help when people subscribe, even though it doesn't cost you anything. It really does help. It feeds the algorithm. It shows YouTube that there are people who actually want to hear what I have to say. And that gets the videos out to more people. So please do. Also check if you thought you were subscribed, you may no longer be. For some strange reason, YouTube is showing that I'm losing exactly the same amount of subscribers each week for the last 3 weeks running. And I find that very odd. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. Suppose it's possible to lose exactly 15 subscribers each week for 3 weeks in a row? It just seems strange that 15 people would up and say, I'm not subscribing to her anymore. But anything's possible. But please check to make sure you're not one of those people who has been magically unsubscribed. It has happened. I've heard of it happening. I've been saying a fair number of unpopular things. You never know. So, and then the last thing I'll say by way of housekeeping is if you aren't aware that I have a community at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn, I do. It's a Discord based community. There is a website. There's a monthly membership fee. It's quite low. There's also an annual way to pay. You save even more money. But what you get is more access to me personally, to chat privately and ask me questions and feed me things you want me to look at and stuff rather than dropping in my DMs. And it really helps support my work. And you get a little more private attention, plus some custom content that's only there for members. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say that is not related to the show. So why are we here tonight? We are here. Hi, Adrian. Wait, I want to pull this up. I'm sorry. Ethan says, I didn't see this. I apologize. Ethan Harris says, yes, all quiet here. The strangest feeling is to see someone in the morning talking to them and then you never talk to them or see them again, just gone. My grandfather told me stories of this. And, as a kid, he's speaking mostly of World War I. It was trench warfare. And even though the United States joined late in the war, he was kind of a crazy person. And even though they had him working sort of as first as a cartographer, because he was really good with maps and logistics and stuff. And then they said, no, we want to, he was an officer. He went in as an officer because he was college educated. They said, you can work behind the scenes or you can be work in the hospital. He didn't want to do that. He got sick of holding people's hands while they died and lighting cigarettes. And, there wasn't a lot of map work to be done. So he asked to go do something more risky where he could use his skills of mapping and identifying things and all that. And he became a runner. Not sure if you guys know what a runner was in World War I, but they would go individually across enemy lines and figure out how to, I don't know how they did this. I honestly don't remember. I don't remember what he told me. But they would take a little thing where you could like look up over hills and see at a distance. And they had little, rudimentary binoculars, and then they would mark out positions, and then they would run it back because they didn't have reliable radio technology. They had it, but it was really unreliable because of the lack of, wires that you could keep from getting blown up and stuff. So he would do this. And one of the things that killed people a lot in World War One were shell fragments. They would fire these giant guns and these huge shells, and they would explode into razor sharp pieces that would just go slicing through the air and cut people to ribbons. And when you could be standing there 1 minute and one hit you in the head and like your head's off, or, half of your head, the helmets didn't really do much to protect you except, maybe something light falling on your head. But I mean, bullets could go right through them. Shells could go right through them. So, you get hit by a shell fragment coming out of nowhere, you're dead basically most of the time, or seriously wounded, unless they're really tiny. And he's lying one day in a church on a hill, kind of overlooking the enemy. And there are loud explosions over his head, and he starts feeling debris falling on him. You do this instinctive thing where you cover your head, and something hits him on the back. Bam. And he said it knocked the wind out of him. All he felt all the air go out of his lungs. If you've ever had that happen to you, it's very painful, where you just like you can't breathe. And things went very dark with all the dust and debris. And he genuinely thought he was dead. Except for about a split second, he thought, okay, I'm dead. I got hit really hard. I have no oxygen. I can't breathe. Everything is dark. Is this what death is like? And then all of a sudden, the dust started to settle, and he's like, and he could cough, and he said, well, okay, I'm not dead. What just happened? And then he felt burning like fire on his back, and he kind of jumped up, turned around, and there was a shell fragment about, he said, the size of a dinner plate, lying flat side down. It had landed on his back instead of like this, which would have cut him in half. And he survived. But he told me stories of people who, exactly that story, Ethan. He'd be talking to somebody in the morning, eating something out of a can, gnawing on a piece of who knows what, shoe leather or whatever. They didn't have a lot to eat, and it wasn't very good, whatever they had. And complaining about trench foot and all the horrible things that they had to deal with. And then it would be time, up and over, like time to go. And, up, your group's ready. Let's up and over. And you'd come up out of the trench and start running. And the same guy you were just talking to, boom, he's dead. Guy to the right of you, boom, he's dead. And you're still running. And he said, this was the way it was. You just every day, like, am I going to be one of the people who just is there and not there? And he lived. And when World War II came along, he was already in his 40s, and he decided he had to do something and volunteered to go back into service, and started off in the Army Air Corps, helping get planes to the Russians over the Aleutian Islands. And then he and then he ended up a JAG at the end of the war. When the war was over, he was a JAG because he was also already a lawyer. But lots of stories. And when he turned 80 years old, I believe it was when he turned 80. Yeah, there was a big anniversary of the armistice from World War One, and my dad took him on the then Concorde. Was still flying, no longer does, of course, but he took him because that was a shorter flight, and he took him over to France, and they visited the American cemetery in France, so he could go and visit his friends. And he took pictures, and somewhere I have these pictures. I wish I had thought to bring them up today, but although my grandfather didn't die in service, so we wouldn't be memorializing him. That would be a Veterans Day thing. But he lived to a ripe old age of 93 and died in his bed. But he stood there in the cemetery sobbing like a child. My father had never seen his father cry. I mean, this was like very tough guy. And he just stood there and just completely dissolved and sobbing. He said, like an infant, just sobbing and sobbing, and he wouldn't stop crying. And similar to that scene in Saving Private Ryan, where at the end he's crying in the cemetery in Arlington, and asking his family, did I, am I a good man? Did I live a good life and all this? And he did the same thing to my dad. He had the same conversation. And that's an 80-year-old man talking about people he knew who were 19, 20, 21 years old, if that. A lot of the Americans were a little older than the Brits. The Brits were going 16, 17. I mean, it was crazy how young they were. Some of them, especially towards the end when they were just like, warm body, get a uniform, here you go. So it, when it comes to days like this, because he told me a lot of his stories and because I think of all like a whole generation of young men that just didn't get to grow up. And then all the people who've come after them, who didn't hesitate. They went up and over. They jumped out of planes. They landed in landing craft. They, whatever, went into buildings in the more recent wars, house to house, not knowing what's going to be there. Driving a Humvee, which I hate to tell you guys, it doesn't really protect you as much as you think if you go over an IED. People losing legs, losing everything, brain damage, dying. I mean, and it's easy for us to sit here at home on a day like this and talk about the evil politicians and they shouldn't have sent there and we had no business being there and what was the point? And I do it too. I was against nation building in Afghanistan. I'm like, you want to drop a whole bunch of bunker buster bombs on the Taliban and like blow them to kingdom come or rearrange the craters in Afghanistan? I'm not going to stop you. I'm not really going to be opposed to it, but I don't think you can rearrange a country and make it into something it seems determined not to be. The British tried it, the Soviets tried it. Why are we going to be so successful? And that's not giving props to any of them. I'm just saying that nobody should have tried it. They made a joke about it in Princess Bride, for goodness sake. But that's just another piece of history. We're here to talk about history. If we really learned from history, would we do some of these things? Would we fight some of these wars? Would we go off on these adventures? Every war is a miscalculation if you start it. If you're responding, if you're defending yourself, you got to do what you got to do. But if you start a war, which we did in Afghanistan and we did in Iraq, and some would argue we did in Korea and Vietnam, that's a miscalculation, a gross miscalculation. And history ought to teach us not to do that. And yet, here we are. Perhaps that is the biggest lesson we should take from history, is that we don't learn from it enough. So we should probably spend more time learning history than perhaps other subjects that we focus on, certainly at least as much. And we shouldn't consider history a separate topic that we cover like an aside, but it really needs to, in my opinion, needs to be something we think of as essential, because we just might save a few million lives. So with all that said, I want to start, I'm trying to think of the best place to start with this, because the question I want to ask of you, audience, is who owns our memory? Now, I'm not talking about Deb's memory or Ethan's or Jess's or Adrian's or anybody's memory. I'm talking about our as a culture, Western culture, and then more narrowly America, the United States of America. Who owns the memory, the history of that? And it might seem like a strange question. Like, what do you mean? Who owns it? Well, who owns it is, in my opinion, important, because if we don't personally take ownership of it in terms of how important it is to us, if we rely on teachers, universities, politicians, NGOs, other people to decide what's important to know, what's important to hold on to and carry forth, what's important to teach to our children, what's important to repeat to ourselves and amongst ourselves, what's important to amplify when it appears that somebody's forgotten or just, not really repeating it accurately or fully. Who owns that? And I think it's more important than ever, because we have AI now, where anything that, if we decide that we're going to get all our knowledge from computers or AI, we're going to ask questions from AI, and AI knows everything, it's going to tell us. Well, guess what? Then we don't own history. We don't own that knowledge. The AI does, and whoever owns the AI does. If you look behind me, that's all the knowledge that I own. It's about fifth of it that's just in this house anyway. Maybe a fifth. It could be less actually. I have a lot of books. But that's a way to own knowledge that is going to be harder to take away from me. I mean, it could burn up, I suppose, in a fire, but you'd have to like come here and take it out of my hands. The stuff in my head, I also own, but that's becoming increasingly unreliable because I am old. So, and the older I get, the less reliable it's going to be. I'm not going to be able to remember everything I once knew. Okay. And I'm going to need to refer back to things. Well, who am I referring to? Who owns the history that I need to then refer to? If I don't own any of it, if I have to go to computers, someone else does. So I think it's very, very, very important to consider that. Like, how much history literally do I own? It doesn't mean it has to all be written by one point of view or one author, or it could be all different kinds of points of view or perspectives on historical events. It doesn't matter, but you should have something at least that lists the dates and the times and the places, for the sole reason that you need a timeline. You need a perspective of what came first, second, third. The narrative behind that and what it means, I highly recommend read a wide variety of historians and ways of looking at it. Just understand what you're looking at when you do. But owning history, I think, is important. And ask yourself, who owns it? Am I relying on other people? Not just for myself, but for my children. Is the history my children are going to learn owned by people who know it, at least know facts? Like, is it true what they're teaching? Is it remotely complete or unbiased, or just, as factual as it can be? Do they like me? And I don't mean you personally. I mean the values that you want to impart to your children, the values you'd like to see carried forward to the next generation. Or are they on a mission that you don't agree with while they're teaching history that they own? Right? So there are all these questions that go along with it. It's not just pick up a book and give it to the kids. It's not a bunch of dates and places to memorize and boom, you're done. There's a lot more to it than that. And, do you have primary sources? Do you only have secondary sources? Why does it matter? And so on. And I just am starting to get the impression that, I always felt this way, going back pretty far, really, going all the way back to high school, that there was a lot missing in the history I was being taught. There was a lot, because remember, my grandfather would tell me stories. He'd tell me stories about Western Europe prior to World War I, because that's the history he learned. History since World War I is like radically different. The world looks completely different post World War I than it did pre World War I. And I was lucky because I could sit at the knee of somebody who lived it. Walking history book could literally tell me, this was this and that was that. And then there was the Kaiser and this guy and the emperor of this and the czar and the king and Ottomans. They didn't teach us that in school. And I went to school in the 70s, elementary school, and then high school in the early 80s. Really didn't learn a lot of that. Little tidbits. Most of the history they taught us was from the 19th century forward. We learned the War for Independence in the United States. That's as far back as we went. And, you go back to like Columbus and stuff. But heck, if I knew what was going on in Spain when Columbus went to ask Queen Isabella, can I have some chips? I had no idea. I just like Columbus in Spain, 2 seconds left. That's it. No context whatsoever for that entire thing. Why did he do it? I don't know. Why was it a big ask? I guess ships are expensive. I don't know. Why bother explore? I don't know. Wealth? It was easy to fill in those gaps. I had no idea. It's not like they went back to ancient Greece and said, all right, let's dig in. Let's dig in and find out the history of like humankind and go through the timeline and understand the way that I genuinely think it was a function of not enough time in the day, not enough days in the year. We got to cover all this other stuff that we're supposed to cover. Oh, and you're a little kid anyway. It's too early. We'll teach you this later, except they never did. And I would say roughly 90% of the history I have learned of any value, I've learned since college. And I have a master's degree, but that's because I love history and I just decided to learn it. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with people who say the same thing. I learned most of my history after college, or I learned most of my history after school, out of school, not from school. Maybe while I was young, but from relatives, from parents, relatives in the military, from TV, from watching MASH, like whatever. I got curious. What was Korea? Why were they there? Let's go read about it. I mean, they really didn't cover it much, did they? So, and today, guys, just last week, I mean, we're getting to a place where memory of 4 years ago is like, might as well be ancient Greece. George Floyd should be alive today. 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 George Floyd should be alive. Blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, it doesn't take me 2 seconds. I'm like, autopsy report. Yeah, I guess I can't. I mean, he should be alive today. If he hadn't taken fentanyl, he would be alive today. Does that negate what Derek Chauvin did? No, of course not. Does it make it okay? I didn't say that. But to sanctify this person like an innocent angel was simply walking down the street, minding his own business. And he was brutally attacked and murdered by this evil cop because racism is just a rewriting of history. And yet, how many people believe it? How many people were like, do they believe it though? Or is it cynical? We don't know. But there probably are a fair number of people under a certain age who 4 years ago were like, I don't know, 12, who don't have anything to compare it to. And they don't think, maybe this is not correct. And then making matters worse, because we don't understand that what happens today is history tomorrow. What happens now is history 5 minutes from now. It's very easy to say, well, that's fake, or this isn't right, or that. And we also have a generation of people, well, more than a generation of people, who wouldn't know how to check if their lives depended on it. They wouldn't even know where to look. And then here's the scariest part. Even when you do know where to look, if you don't already own a place to look, because the history is 4 years ago, I don't have books about that. Sorry. I don't have anything containing the, verified original autopsy report. Here it is in a book. I have to trust that I can find it online somewhere. I have to trust that somebody out there went and got the actual documents and they're going to make it available. And somebody else who doesn't want me to see it isn't going to memory hole it. What is the concept of a memory hole? Why I picked that title very intentionally. Those of you who read Orwell know exactly what it is. In George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984, the memory hole is a significant element of the totalitarian society of Oceania. Winston Smith, who is the protagonist of this book, works in the Ministry of Truth. And he's responsible for revising old newspaper articles to conform to the party's ideology. And the memory hole is a crucial aspect of this process. It's a big slit in the wall of the Ministry of Truth, and that's where you dispose of unwanted documents. I think that this, autopsy report might someday be one of those documents. It's just a big slit, and it exists in lots of rooms there and lots of halls, but you put the thing you don't want in there and it gets memory holed. And his routine consists of disposing of documents in this hole. And he's trained to make sure that all events connect with later events to strengthen Big Brother's power over the citizens. Does that sound familiar? I just checking. And it represents the party's systematic erasure of the past to maintain control over Oceania's narrative. So my concern, dear audience members, is that we are memory holing large chunks of history, especially American history, in an effort to build a narrative that supports the people currently in power. I'm not going to name a party because it's irrelevant. It's not about a party or another party, just people in power to let them stay there, and people who are served by them or who serve them. I don't know. On any given day, you can decide who serves whom. It's a toss up, but basically to keep you where you are and keep them where they are. Is it a grand conspiracy where they're all getting together and going "Whoa," in a dark room? Probably not. But are the incentives aligned to result in that? Yes. We joke about it now. It's not really a joke, but we joke about with journalism, that didn't happen. Well, if it happened, it was, not as much as you think. Well, yeah, okay, it happened, but it really should happen more. Well, we're going to be putting more in because it's good. This is the cycle. We're going to do it more because it's good. It didn't happen. It's not happening. You're crazy. The other one that's a big one for a lot of us is COVID. I remember at the time, I said there's going to come a day and people who were like foaming at the mouth, ready to imprison us, take away all of our rights, take our property, take our businesses, lock us up. People wanted to deny us access to everything under the sun, lock us out of hospitals, deny us medical treatment. I mean, you name it. There are people on record, politicians, professors, all kinds of people in power, who business owners who were and journalists who were saying the most horrible things, absolutely totalitarian, dictatorial things about those of us who were skeptical of COVID policies. Never mind oppose them outright. People were skeptical about certain treatments. People who said, why can't I choose my own medication, my own treatment? And they said horrid things. And now, what? Who, what? I said, what? What? I said that, but what? Mask? What? Like they never said it. It was just a few years ago. And people are coming back. I have the receipts. I have the receipts. So there is some history you can own. I have pictures of a thing that you said, screenshots. You said this, you said that, but there's no accountability. So even when we own history and even when we know it, and even when we can go back and recall it because we remember it happened and I got to go get the receipts and bring it forward, because we don't respect it, we don't respect truth, it's mattering less and less. So you have these two components, three, actually owning it, knowing it, or knowing that it's owned and somewhere to go get it. And then the last one, anyone caring. It's like, yeah, okay, so what? So what? That's a truth. That's your truth. This is my truth. So what is happening when we kind of like blur, make memories blurry or completely erase them or shove them aside or don't teach them at all? We make room for new narratives, of course, but we also denigrate memory. Doesn't matter. So if we live in the now. What matters now? It's like, yeah, well, what matters now is that we don't make decisions now based on a false premise. The false premise exists because you rewrote history. That thing that you were basing today's decision on did not happen. And what did happen ought to change today's decision, but you're not letting it because you're deciding it doesn't matter. And I'm genuinely concerned that we are doing that a lot with history. So at this point, before I launch into some other materials that I want to show you that go back to like 2017, where people started talking about this and like some of the mechanics of how this came to be, it's been going on for decades and decades. Okay. I'm not going to go back all the way to the well, in parts, I'm going to go back to like 1933. I'm going to go back a little bit, but I'm going to start in 2017 and then we'll kind of jump around. But I want to check in on some of your comments because you've been so kind to join me live and I want to bring you into this conversation. So, Adrian says, my great uncle was a priest in the Navy in the Vietnam War. He wrote letters to my family from there. One of his letters talks about the Tet Offensive and how horrible it was. And that kind of primary source material is a treasure. So I hope somewhere those letters are kept because people who lived it actually were there. Like I was physically standing there and I saw it. Okay. And I'm writing you from the battlefield. That's pretty credible. Anything written after the dust settles, whatever. I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm saying the possibility exists for it to be, kind of fuzzy, fog of war type stuff. Plus you also have trauma that affects what you remember. I mean, I don't remember vividly certain things that happened because they were traumatic for me personally, and other people have had to remind me. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I remember things more vividly than they actually, like, they were bigger than they actually were because of the same reason. So it helps have multiple perspectives, but it's still gold and matters a lot more, I think, than some analysis of something that, second, third hand. Um, so then David Goodnow says the people who decided to do nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan were not the equals of George Marshall. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a great biography to read, by the way, is if you read about George Marshall's life, which I recommend that people do, you see why. That you it's a little depressing though, because you start to wonder, do we even have people like George Marshall anymore? Do we produce those people? And are we going to produce people like that if we don't bring them up with an appreciation and respect for history? Because one of the things that you learn about most of the leadership in World War II, and to a certain degree World War I as well, is these are people who learned the entire history of Western civilization. To a degree, they learned, if they went to West Point or someplace like that, they learned it there, but they also learned it in school. Like I said, my grandfather didn't go to West Point. He went to Amherst College, but before that, he went to Erasmus Hall in Brooklyn, public high school. And they were learning Latin and Greek and the history, Aristotle, Plato, et cetera, et cetera. They had to be well-versed in all of this. They were so well-read. They learned about the Punic Wars and the Trojan Wars and all these different wars. And, they had an appreciation for the way war in general shapes civilization, the way conflict shapes civilization, the way certain decisions and tests and failures shape civilization. And they had a kind of a respect for it. They also understood and had no compunction in terms of talking about different cultures. So this notion that people in my grandfather's day were walking around going, doodly-doo, I'm totally ignorant of other cultures. These are immigrants. His parents were right off the boat. Okay. He lived in a neighborhood probably that was more diverse than your neighborhood is right now. And this idea that they didn't have an appreciation for and an understanding that other people don't necessarily think the way they do or live the way they do or worship the way they do is ludicrous. America was not some like white toast Velveeta eating place where everybody thought the same all the time. That's just not true. And a proper study of history would show that. I'm not saying they all got along, but that's also one of the things that they learned. And so when it comes to war or things like Afghanistan, I genuinely think that our more modern generations who don't learn a lot of history are delusional. Everybody wants what we want, human rights. Yeah, everybody to be treated the same and have freedom and liberty and, to be loved and raise their kid. No, honey, they don't. They don't all want that. I know that's kind of hard for you to wrap your mind around, protester on Columbia's campus, but no, people the world over are not the same. They're humans. We're all human beings, but culture does change what you want out of life, what's important to you out of life, what you think about your history and other people's history and why it matters. You don't get to just project your own, narrow little view of the world onto everybody else. And ironically, it's like, we need to learn a true history. And I just sit and I listen to people, do tell. Let's do that, shall we? Like how slavery wasn't invented by colonial America. That's the point I'm making. So they understood that nation building was, if you're going to do it, if you're going to get in there, first of all, you've got to defeat the enemy. Like that's a prerequisite. You've got to really win. You can't just be like, okay, we're going to stop shooting now and you guys are going to be nice. Okay. You got like, everybody's gonna be okay, right? You guys are good. Put your guns down and we're going to start like nation building now. Okay. I don't think so, but whatever. Adrian says, ideally it belongs to all of us to understand and transmit our own history to the next generation. Yes, that would be the ideal. And the more of us individually that own history or own some history, the harder it would be for any consolidated, any group that was trying to consolidate power to control us. They wouldn't be able to put one over on us, so to speak. There'd be enough people out there, even if we all disagreed with each other, even if those of us who own, a bunch of books, a bunch of history, even if we're bickering amongst ourselves, it makes us hard to control, doesn't it? Rather than Big Brother said it had, we were always at war with Eurasia. That's what it is. If you don't agree, you're an idiot. And, Mob A and Mob B is still a lot easier for them than if you have 300 million people who all disagree. I'd prefer that, And then let's see, what do we got here? Aquinas, hi Aquinas, is a love of books for the win. Yes. A Baker says Pergamon Press, Robert Maxwell's publishing house, owned it for a couple of decades. He's Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and she was Jeffrey Epstein's partner. So, owned history, or probably some versions of it. I'm not sure when you said owned, what you're referring back to. So if you want to add that in the comments, I'll bring it up. And then Ego Brain says, yeah, good points. We don't even have newspapers to go back to. Yeah, remember we had like printed newspaper. We still have them, but nobody saves them. We recycle them, and that's fine. But remember we used to have microfiche. Do you guys remember that? It was the actual newspaper. So it hadn't been digitized. It'd been click, 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 click. I'm going to take a picture of the actual thing that was printed on the day. It doesn't make it true. Okay, I'm not suggesting that because something was in the newspaper, it was true. I mean, my goodness, the weekly news of the world is a newspaper. I'm talking about the fact that you can at least get a snapshot of what people were reading. That is true. So, and that matters. So if you have a New York Post from, 1980 something, and you have it on microfiche, so you can like look at the actual pictures of the actual paper, not digitized where you have to trust that somebody, scanned it, put all the same words in, put the same images. It's a facsimile. It's not the literal thing. Then you don't even know for certain if that's what people read on that day. You could recreate what people were reading just then and say, here's the paper from then. Now, I haven't looked at archives online from newspapers, magazines, et cetera, to know whether they're doing it like, here's a picture, or they're digitizing, but I think they're increasingly moving towards everything is digital. And so they don't feel the need. You don't need a copy of what was in print. Here's the digital version. And that concerns me. Just going to say, because we could change that in a second and you would never know if it was true or not. And yes, in diaries and letters, these are great because they are firsthand accounts. The Maxwell's daughters helped to start Google and know that. Got you. Okay. And 23andMe. All right. So kind of, yeah. In that respect, definitely. That if the people on like Google and the search engines and Bing and Microsoft and all that, they definitely own one of the major pieces of the history production puzzle. And I say production intentionally because they are scraping things that have been written by other people. And they may be giving it to you. It's like, here's a link to the original journal article. Here's a link to an ebook that is from a book or something. But they still kind of own that. If they don't want you to find it and you don't already know it exists by title, they can make it really hard for you to find it. And here's an example from just this week. In 1984, a book was published called From Time Immemorial by Jane Peters. I believe that's her name. Jane Peters, one of the two. And it's about the Arab-Israeli conflict. I've since learned there's some errata, there's some omissions, but none of it changes the core argument, which stands the test of time. But it does change the current narrative about the conflict a lot. A lot of the things that you're seeing, even sitting congresswomen say about the conflict, will be easily proven lies if you take a look at that book. Well, that book is out of print. The first publishing house sold it to another publishing house that then, I think, decided, or either they sold it again or they decided not to print it. They say they can't find the family to ask if they can release it or something. I don't know what their argument was, but it's out of print. And they said that when somebody inquired about it, they weren't going to offer the book to anyone wanting to buy old copies or whatever because of, them not agreeing with what it says, essentially. So here's a book. You can get old copies for $300, $150, et cetera. I have a copy. It's falling apart. The pages are that yellow, crumbly, like it's not going to last because it's crumbling already. And it's a trade paperback from 1984. but I treasure it because you cannot get your hands on it. My husband did some searching, found an online ebook in the dark recesses of the web. There's a place you can go rent it. There are places you can find the charts and graphs and maps. But that's a lot of work. First of all, you have to know the book exists. Good luck. You couldn't possibly search for anything, even, if you just search for that title, you probably get it, but you'll find out quickly it's out of print. But you'd have to know the title. If you just search for Arab-Israeli conflict, books about whatever, you will not find it. And then after that, you got to dig and dig and dig and decide you're committed enough to go read it. That's how they do it. That's just one example from this week. How many more? How many more are there that are like that? Yeah, A. Baker says, write books. I agree. Write books and buy books. And I know it's expensive. Buy used books if you can. Buy old editions of textbooks that haven't been edited. David says, time to start brain training. Look up Speed Think by Heinz Holzer and Limitless by Jim Quick. Yeah, I wish my brain weren't so calcified. I would do that. Teaching history well is not easy, but what standard will the people, events, and ideas by what standard will be? Very true. This is a good point that Aquinas makes, that teaching history is not easy. And teaching it in this sort of industrial schooling model is especially difficult. For the reasons I gave. You're limited on time. And I'm going to go into some other reasons I found in an article why it's hard. But I don't think that that's an excuse, in the sense that, well, we all know Deb wants to get rid of the education industrial complex. But with your own children, please don't count on other people to do it. And it doesn't mean you've got to sit down with history books and recite, dates and times and places. You can make it fun. It's not too soon when kids are little to talk to them about history. You can read picture books that take place in a time gone by, and you can get kids interested in history that way. I have a book up there on the shelf. I wish I could quickly put my hands on it. Yeah, it's pretty far up there somewhere, but it's A Street Through Time. Little kids love it. It's a big format picture book, and it takes the same landscape across both pages when you open it up. Starts off in almost prehistory. There's just I don't even know if there's cave people. It's really bare bones. Each time you turn the page, they tell you what years or what period, and they add things to the scene. And they keep adding things to the scene. And you keep going. And now we're in, we're sort of in early agrarian society. And then we're going, oh, look, now it's Roman time. Oh, look, now it's, and it just keeps going. And it is so interesting, even for me as an adult, to see the number of years and the changes and the changes and the changes. That's visual. There's a little bit of writing, and you can, read it to a child, but they see the changes like, whoa, you mean they lived like that and they didn't have, whoa, where did they go to the bathroom? Oh my God. You don't have to sit there and say, all right, let's go in 1776. It doesn't have to be like that. But I think a lot of parents are intimidated, and even teachers, because they don't know history. They don't know it, or it was taught to them in such a boring way that they're like, oh my God, it's so boring. Who's ever going to need to know this? I'm not going to need to know what happened at the Battle of the blah, blah, blah. Why do I care what the Maginot Line is? Why do I care what the Schlieffen Plan is? Why do I care what, but because believe it or not, if you understood what the Schlieffen Plan was, and you might understand why the Germans made this miscalculation of what they were going to do in World War I, and why maybe it ended up in a stalemate, and why maybe the whole entire planet changed shape. Okay. These things kind of feed each other. So it is hard to teach, but it can be done. And I think we need to do it. Ethan Harris says visited Little Bighorn, ended up with unique research angle, stolen valor of LBH battle, Little Bighorn battle. Interesting. Love to know more about that. Yesterday is history, Adrian says. Yes, it is. Solitaire, lots of card counting, math, and remembering the sequence of cards in the deck as they're revealed. This will train your memory. You're absolutely right. Logic and reason was not allowed in 2020. Ego Brain says, and A. Baker says, I keep intending to write articles for online outfits, but I'm too busy. It's also hard to produce material that helps people stay connected to some of these issues. I feel that so much. Ego Brain says people care more about thinking what they want to believe rather than actually being true. Aha, the post-truth thing. We're getting into perspective. I'm going to read a little bit about that in a second. And then Ethan Harris says, I collect history like a 45 round from My Lai from a lieutenant who died in the helicopter crash at the end when the pilots tried to rescue the villagers. Wow. That's a cool artifact. Yeah. I meant to gather all kinds of things here and I forgot some, but I actually have down below there, I have a Stone Age tool that I got when I was 7 years old. We went to England. I was a kid. We went on the QE2. And browsing around in antique stores, whatever. And I was always really interested in history. And old stuff just fascinated me. I was like, how'd they live? How'd they live? I was so curious. And there was this tool, and it's a very obviously human-shaped tool. It may have been used for removing fur from hides or something. It's kind of had a very slanted edge and a stone that like oblong that looked like you could hold it in your hand and scrape things. So who knows what it was actually for, but it's a really cool stone. It's quite polished. And then the end is like rigid, or ribbed like a knife. And I had to have it. I had to have it. And it was, and written on it, it's kind of slubbed off now, but it was obviously someone, when they found it, they wrote on it, like what cave it was found in, whatever at the time, like in the 1800s. And that's been kind of rubbed away. And that was the thing I was allowed to get from the antique store. I was like, can I please have it? It's like, this is the coolest thing ever. As a 7-year-old, I wanted the Stone Age tool. And I still have it to this day down there. All right. So then Wright said, Fred says toleration was the solution people found since they migrated fleeing the religious wars of Europe. Not sure what that was related to, but you're right. And if people understood that there were religious wars in Europe, that might be, this is the thing. There's so many tidbits that relate to other things. And, kids today don't know it. Adrian says, might want to even keep history about yourself. For example, at a conference, I declined to provide my pronouns. They put my pronouns in the conference. This is so important. Thank you for bringing this up. Your own history is now being stolen. Your digital twin is being built in a machine. And we are, 5 minutes away from anyone, anywhere who has the means and desire to do it, reinventing your history and telling you, no, that's not true. You never lived there. You didn't do that. Here it is. Look, it's in the computer. No, I did. I lived it. No, you didn't. Prove it. I mean, this is possible now. So if you don't maintain, I know we're all tempted to shred everything and throw away old documents and leases and deeds and all the things that prove who we are and where we've been and what we've done, but I recommend against it. Keep a pile or a box or something that tells your own history, if for no other reason than for your children or your relatives, because to dig up things about my grandfather, even though he was alive for so long, there's a lot he threw away. So there's giant chunks that are missing of like, well, when did he go from here to here and what happened? Now, if I go into Ancestry, something like that, they give me just surface stuff. Well, the census said he lived at this address in such and such a time. Well, okay, do I trust the census? Right? And that was then. Think about now with the digital stuff. And then Ethan Harris says, Google started scanning newspapers in 2010. Thousands of libraries sent in old copies. And then in 2013, they stopped the project. Many libraries never received their files back. It's not even possible to use keywords in the news. That is scary. And this is really, really important. Thank you for telling me that. And then let's see. Oh, yeah. So you're telling the story about the book. They were horrible to me. Same with HarperCollins. These are the people, because Ethan's the person that I recommended the book to. And they were just like, you can't have that book. Tony Baloney says all books are being digitized. So certain passages words can be removed and replaced to hide certain truths. Yes. It's important for us to own our own history. And this will be the last one for a little while. There's a conspiracy about Masons and a prophecy of the next world war that people today repeat that was a hoax in the 1800s because someone wrote a book about it like 50 or so years later without the hoax. The protocols of the elders of Zion are being passed off as actual history today. Now, that wouldn't be possible if people have been taught their history of Tsarist Russia, of, World War One Germany, of between the wars in Germany, Weimar Republic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody said something super wise to me today, and then I'm going to go to my little readings because I'm all proud of them that I pulled. They said, if I told you, speaking, okay, if I told you that the Blub people had something very bad happen to them, and millions of them were killed, and they just never really bounced back after that, the terrible massacre of the Blubs. And you would remember, oh, there were people called Blubs and terrible things happened to them, and a lot of them died because these other people killed the Blubs. Oh, that's bad. Okay, let's not, we don't want to have people killing other people anymore. That might be all you'd take away from that. But it doesn't matter, and you don't know why, and you don't know what happened next, and you don't really know anything because you don't know who the Blubs are. Who are the Blubs? How did they get, where did they come from? How did they get to be? Why kill them? What? So this is what we do. We teach these things in a little vacuum. This bad thing happened to these people. Why? Do we even ask? Well, it was bad. Why do you need to know why? Bad people did bad things. Yeah, but people killing people is bad, and I'm putting quotes, unless the people they killed were trying to kill them, then it's self-defense. Or they were killing each other at the same time or something. I mean, like, the why kind of matters. It kind of matters. It's not irrelevant. And that's just with killing. Same thing with land taking. Same thing with migration. Same thing with, you don't get to, if we teach these things out of context, and it becomes so easy to put all these narratives around it. And we're doing that a lot with American history right now, as you know. But why? Why are we doing that? So I'm saying we should teach why certain things happen in history. Well, one of the things that happened in history is we started teaching history differently. Why did we? What happened? And what did people say about it as recently as, the 21st century? Okay. So let's take a look. I did find some articles and stuff, and let me get that up here. This is very annoying because my screen I have two screens, and it makes things so big I can't see them. All right. So going back, I was looking around for stuff, and I went back to 2015, and I found this piece. How much U.S. history do Americans actually know? Less than you think. So this is from, I don't know anything about this. This is the Smithsonian, but they asked Grateful American Foundation how we fix it. So I'm not going to go into that, how he says we should fix it. Just the first part. Last year, Polytech a student group at Texas Tech University, went around campus and asked 3 questions. Who won the Civil War? Who is our vice president? And who did we gain our independence from? Students' answers range from the South for the first question to I have no idea for all 3 of them. However, when asked about the show Snooki starred in, Jersey Shore, or Brad Pitt's marriage history, they answered correctly. And it's easy to laugh and mock this and say, well, those are, silly, stupid people, and lots of other people knew it. Da, 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 da. Well, here's the problem. These are pretty big things. The average person on the street should know who won the Civil War. The average person on the street at any given moment should know who the vice president is. They just should. And if they don't, it's not something to be proud of. It's not something to say is no big deal, especially if they vote. And now that we have social media and people are being trained to not only have opinions about everything, but share their opinions about everything, it matters more. Because people are not self-regulating. They're not saying, I don't know shit from Shinola. I don't know anything about anything. I know my job, and I know this, and I know Snooki, and that's it. That's all I know. So, I'm going to stay off the internet because I'm dumb. They don't do that, do they? They form an opinion about stuff they know nothing about. Just go look at the protests. What river, what sea? I don't know. Why are we here? Well, I just heard that, some people were being picked on, and I was going to go be supportive. Wow. Well, multiply that times a few thousand, and could be a Bolshevik revolution on the basis of nothing. On the basis of everyone was doing it. Seemed like a great idea. I want to be a good person. But what's interesting is when you stop and talk to the people who aren't there, who either don't agree with them or just aren't protesting. Like, I don't have an opinion on this because I know that I don't know enough to have an opinion on this. They actually know way more than the people who are protesting. They know the river, they know the sea, they know the conflict, they know the players. They even roughly know how long it's been going on. And they just say, I really don't know enough about the intricacies. So I'm not going to show up and protest either way. They still know more than the people participating. That's why it matters. If we didn't have the internet and social media, I'd be like, this is a real shame. And I'm worried about what mistakes we're going to make moving into the future because voting is still an issue. But at least they're not moving opinion like this with their every utterance on the internet. So there was that. Then I found this article from Carol Markowitz from 2017. Why schools have stopped teaching American history. 2017, guys. Oh wait, I just glanced this in my comments. I'm going to come back to more comments, but Crystal says the most recent Street Through Time is a rather dystopian last page now depicting the future complete with pride flag. Mine doesn't have that. I'm so glad I own mine. Mine's like 10 years old. That's horrifying, but that's a great example, Crystal. Thank you. My Street Through Time, no politics, no nothing. The present day one looks like just regular town. That's exactly what I'm talking about. All right. So, Carol, why schools have stopped teaching American history? This is January 2017. Don't know much about history, goes the famous song. It's an apt motto for the Common Core's elementary school curriculum, and it's becoming a serious problem. A 2014 report by the National Assessment of Education Progress showed that an abysmal 18% of American high school kids were proficient in U.S. history. This is 2017, 18%. It's gone down. When colleges such as Stanford declined to require Western civilization classes or high schools proposed changing their curriculum so that history is taught only from 1877 onward, this happened in North Carolina, right where I live, it's merely a blip on our news cycle, if at all. Did you guys know this happened? Did you know that many schools decided not only to do away with Western Civ, which includes world history with any degree of thoroughness, but we're going to just teach 1877 forward. So if you're wondering why they're spending such an inordinate amount of time on slavery and this much time on the war for independence, or they call it the Revolution, which, yes, I know we've called it the American Revolution, but it really wasn't. It was a counter-revolution, by the way, just so you know. I mean, there's even a book about that. It was a war for independence. And there is a difference and it matters. But we don't teach that, do we? Probably because the people who started calling it a revolution were Marxists who wanted to reclassify it as such. A 2012 story in Perspectives on History magazine by University of North Carolina professor Bruce Van Sledwright found that 88% of elementary school teachers considered teaching history a low priority. That's in 2012. The reasons are varied. Van Sledwright found that teachers didn't focus on history because students aren't tested on it at the state level. So now you see why having the state involved in education literally changes what gets taught. What gets tested gets taught. It's really very simple. And that's in private school as well as public. But very often the private schools teach to similar sort of state standards, even if they do it more rigorously or with different materials, because these kids are going to be applying to the same colleges, evaluated by the same standards, and there's pressure for them to be able to pass the same tests, or at least do better than those tests. So teaching extra stuff, the incentive isn't necessarily there unless other people are asking for it. A teacher I spoke with in Brooklyn confirmed this. She said all the pressure in lower grades is on math and English language arts because of the state tests and the weight they carry. Still true. She teaches fourth grade and says that age is the first time students are taught about explorers, American settlers, the American Revolution, and so on. But why so late? Van Sledwright also found that teachers just didn't know enough history to teach it. He wrote there was some holiday curriculum as history instruction, but that was it. So the little kids don't get any historical perspective for anything where they think that it's just, we're going to make a turkey with our hand and it's Thanksgiving. Yay. Oh, no, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. It's not Columbus Day. So you don't even learn the explorer part, or you just learn that it's bad. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. Is that really history or is it narrative? As the parent of a first grader, I've also seen even the holiday curriculum in short supply. First grade might seem young, but it's my daughter's third year in the New York public school system after pre-K and kindergarten. She goes to one of the finest public schools in the city, yet knows about George Washington exclusively from the soundtrack of the Broadway show Hamilton. She wouldn't be able to tell you who discovered America. So far, she's encountered no mention of any historical figure except for Martin Luther King Jr. This isn't a knock on King, obviously. He's a hero in our house, but he can't be the sum total of historical figures our kids learn about in even early elementary school. For one thing, how do we tell King's story without telling the story of the founding fathers? And this is so important. How many times have we tried to tell the story of the civil rights era, and you end up hearing that, well, blacks were considered 3/5 of a person? False. Incorrect. Totally incorrect framing. But if you weren't taught about the founding of the country and the Constitution and what the compromise was and why it was important and why we have a Bill of Rights and why that was important. And ironically, the slavers may have wanted that Bill of Rights, but it also put in place that and the 3/5 compromise made it possible for us to eventually get rid of slavery. But they're not taught that. They're taught like these little sound bites. And it's much easier then for the narrative spinners to come in later and say what the sound bites mean. Nothing holds them together. They're like floating bits of history that anyone can tie together into a fabric. So then she goes on to talk about Jay Leno's jaywalking thing and so on. Now you might be wondering, what happened to Western Civ? Why, where, what? Why did they get rid of it? Okay, here's 2020. The prevailing opinion in our universities is that Western civilization was essentially a wartime propaganda effort invented during World War I. Stanley Kurtz's excellent new report, The Lost History of Western Civilization, proves this notion is nonsense on stilts. The credentialed radicals who run higher education wanted to erase America's memory of its past. This is well documented. They said so. This isn't a conspiracy theory. So they set out to delegitimize the standard Western Civilization survey course that was offered at many of our nation's colleges at the time. Their effort was based on a tendentious research by scholars such as Gilbert Allardyce and Lawrence Levine, who argued that before World War I, Americans thought the United States was exceptional and distinct from Europe and never studied Europe and America as a civilizational unity. Allardyce and Levine argued that the Western Civ course was invented during World War I as a form of war propaganda, manufacturing a cultural connection so our gallant doughboys would willingly sail to France to fight the Boche. Utter nonsense. Therefore, and the therefore is always the point, who cares if you get rid of the Western Civilization course? Hey, hey, ho, ho, Jesse Jackson and his cadre of activists chanted in 1987, Western culture's got to go. And why not? Hadn't it been created in living memory? A professor of 70 was older than a Western Civ course. Why shouldn't the university dispense with it? So Western Civ did go. Stanford got rid of the course in 1988. In 1964, the Western Civ course had been required in virtually every American university, but the requirement had almost vanished by 2010. Some universities kept the course for students to take voluntarily, but increasingly numbers replaced it entirely with a world civilization course. 3 times as many students take the College Board's World History Advanced Placement exam as take European history. Now, world history, if you're wondering, and if you go look at, for example, even Khan Academy, that's used by a lot of homeschoolers. I'm even using it, but I'm not teaching all of it. I'm literally cherry picking the Western Civ pieces. Because if I were to make my daughter sit through the entire history of India and the entire history of China and the entire history of all these things, and I'm not saying these are not interesting or that she might not someday want to learn them, but we live in the West. Our culture is Western, Enlightenment to be specific. And I do think it's a little more important that she dive deeper into the history of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and even the Middle East, because it is relevant today. Thought, let's take some of that. But I did cherry pick it to be Western Civ because what they've laden it with now is so much. We have Mayans, we have South America, we have, indigenous peoples of every conceivable continent. Nothing against them. Again, I'm sure it's very interesting. But when you're talking about a 10th grader and there's only so many hours in a day, this is what happens. And then what happens in our schools is because of the current political emphasis on the marginalized and giving voice to people who previously had not had a voice, we don't hear from Aristotle and Plato, and we do hear from the Aztecs. Okay. And that skews perceptions quite a bit because we also hear from them from from the position of a conquered people, nothing about why they might need to have been conquered or why maybe it was not such a horrible, horrible thing. Remember, I said people killed a lot of people? Yes, but why? Why did they? If the narrative's always going to be, it's always bad, it's always wrong. Well, they were sacrificing virgins, I mean, whatever. But that's what world civilization is now. Talk to most kids, they'll tell you they're learning an awful lot about indigenous peoples of the world and not a whole lot about the people of the West that come before 1877. And then it says, yeah, so the World History College Board, our students never have the chance to learn about the sequence linking Athens and Jerusalem to America, the continuous history from Plato to NATO. No, they don't know. They have no idea what influenced the founders of the country. And that is really important because how can you appreciate what they did, the exceptional nature of what they did, if you don't understand those connections? You can't. You literally can't. It's easy to spin a yarn of they just want to take stuff from Indians and that was it. Oh, sorry, native tribes. Not anything about wanting to, establish a new country that was for individual liberty. No, we can't have that story. Of course, Western civilization exists. It's not just that we read the Bible and Homer, that Rome bequeathed us its republican government and its law, that our jury system is Anglo-Saxon, our common law medieval, and our greatest playwright, one William Shakespeare. It's that every generation from Rome to the present has continuously added to the same culture. The copyist monks in the ruins of the Roman Empire, the Renaissance gentlemen who transformed the rediscovered classics into new humanism, the Bacons and the Galileos and the Harveys who built a new scientific method and body of knowledge upon Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy. In America, our founding fathers built a new republic upon foundation 2,000 years deep. Our children do not know this, nor do they care that even if we told them over to, hey, did you know? It's too late. They don't have a frame of reference. There's nothing got them excited about knowing, and they've already been told it's all bad anyway. So now you're trying to break through that wall. So that's what happened to Western Civ 1988. Then we have some myths that explain a little bit of this. There was a survey release that said that only 1 in 3 Americans would pass the U.S. citizenship test. This is in 2018. So prior to the article I just read you. And here are the myths that they uncovered about history. History is boring, dry, and useless. In the early 20th century, education experts developed the field of social studies. You're wondering why we call it social studies and not history? Here you go. Early 20th century. Intended to replace history. They literally wanted to replace history. They literally wanted to memory hole actual timeline sequential history and come up with this social studies. They argued students wouldn't be interested in the past unless it was somehow related to the present, Paulo Freire. Even though that's not so much early 20th century, it's more 60s, but nevertheless, same idea. We have to have it be social. It has to somehow be relevant. Besides, history lacked any practical purpose. It's not a hammer. I can't use it like today. It's often presented in decontextualized bits and pieces, just like I just said, as part of larger themes like cultures around the world, American symbols, things like that. History can be boring and dry, but it can also be presented as a series of stories. So that's one myth. Another one is memorizing historical facts and dates is a bad idea. Sometimes not. I'm going to show you something that I use in homeschooling, and I find it very important. The timetable of history. See how thick it is? A horizontal linkage of people and events. Every home should have a book like this, in my personal opinion. even if you don't have children. This book is a reference. It tells who did what when from 4500 BC to the present day, updated for the 21st century. Now, obviously, pretty soon it will be outdated, I suppose, but I'm more interested in all the stuff that they've tried to erase from before 1877. So that's part of why I bought it. It has an extensive index, so you can actually look things up, and it goes through the timeline in a chart, and there are little columns. I don't know if you can see this, where there are symbols about, literature and different kinds of events and types of things that it covers. I don't know if I showed that very well, but they have visual arts, music, science, technology and growth, daily life, history and politics, what was happening. This is an amazing resource. So I get fuzzy. I'm sure you guys do. Wait, was that before or after who came first, Plato or Aristotle? I mean, I remember that, but I'm saying there's things you might not remember, right? This helps a lot. And believe it or not, kids can find it fun. Hey, just open a page, randomly open the book, drop your finger somewhere. What did you find? You can play a game with it. It doesn't have to be the dates. It's not always bad to have dates and times, and it puts things in perspective. So what were they doing in music in 4500 BC? Kids might find that interesting. Adults find that interesting. Myth number 3, history is developmentally inappropriate topic below the 3rd or 4th grade. This may be the most pernicious one. And I'm showing you the wrong page. Here it is. And groundless myth of all. A century ago, students learned to read from books that included stories drawn from history. But beginning in the 1930s, the experts decided children should instead learn primarily about the world around them. The result was the expanding environments curriculum, which limits children in kindergarten through 3rd grade to learning about themselves, their families, and the local community. That's literally it. I was at an antique store, or one of those thrift stores, you go into, and people will sometimes put old books. And I took pictures and posted them on X, in fact, of some old textbooks that I found from roughly, 3rd grade, 4th grade. And it was exactly that. And the textbooks were in the schools, I believe, in the late 30s, early 40s. And it was it. It's like, this is my community. This is the mailman. This is the local post office. This is the police station. And that was it. Your world is very small, kiddo. Meanwhile, also downstairs, right below this room, I have books that belonged to my father when he was a small child, also in the 30s, but obviously with, he wasn't in a public school, but his parents took pains to get him books about history. And that little history textbook was going back to like ancient Greece and ancient Rome and the Roman legions and the this and the that. And oh my God, he was obsessed. He was drawing pictures in the margins of the book, and he was trying to like draw swords. He was drawing all these little Roman swords and trying to get it just right, and a Roman shield. And he wanted to make himself a shield on it. Don't tell me kids aren't interested in this stuff. I'm sorry. It's just adults with lack of imagination. So that's another myth. So those are the 3 myths that it's, where is it? Myth number 1, history is boring and useless. Myth number 2, memorizing facts and dates is a bad idea. And myth number 3, history is developmentally inappropriate below the 4th grade. False, false, false. All right. Then we get on to, where do we have? Just to show, you know what? Before I delve in any more of this junk, I'm going to read from the stuff I found. So I pulled out some books. I just told you about when this kind of stuff started. I have this book, The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. If you don't have this book and you're interested in the history of education itself, this is a good one. And I pulled up this section. I'm just going to read it because I don't have it digitized or pictures of it. A change in the governing mind. Sometimes the best hiding place is right in the open. It took 7 years of reading and reflection for me to finally figure out that mass schooling of the young by force was a creation of the 4 great coal powers of the 19th century. It was under my nose, of course, but for years I avoided seeing what was there because no one else seemed to notice. Forced schooling arose from the new logic of the industrial age. the logic imposed on flesh and blood by fossil-fueled and high-speed machinery. This simple reality is hidden from view by early philosophical and theological anticipations of mass schooling and various writings about social order and human nature. But you shouldn't be fooled any more than Charles Francis Adams was fooled when he observed in 1880 that what was being cooked up for kids unlucky enough to be snared by the newly proposed institutional school net combined characteristics of the cotton mill and the railroad with those of the state prison. After the Civil War, utopian speculative analysis regarding isolation of children in custodial compounds where they could be subjected to deliberate molding routines began to be discussed seriously by the Northeastern policy elites of business, government, and university life. Sound familiar? Yeah, they were doing it then too. These discussions were inspired by a growing realization that the productive potential of machinery driven by coal was limitless. Railroad development made possible by coal and starting new inventions like the telegraph seemed suddenly to make village life and local dreams irrelevant. A new governing mind was emerging in harmony with the new reality. The principal motivation for this revolution in family and community life might seem to be greed, but this surface appearance conceals philosophical visions approaching religious exaltation in intensity. Sound familiar to today about the one world, better world, 23rd agenda? We're all going to own nothing and be happy, and you're going to have the job that's perfectly suited to you, and you're not going to really want anything, and you're going to contribute to the greater good. And right? Yeah. Okay. Continuing on. That effective early indoctrination of all children would lead to an orderly scientific society. Okay, socially just society, scientific society. They just replaced one kind of society with another, one controlled by the best people at the WEF and UNESCO today, now freed from the obsolete straitjacket of democratic traditions and historic American libertarian attitudes. Oh, those pesky libertarian attitudes, can't have them. Forced schooling was the medicine to bring the whole continental population into conformity with these plans so that it might be regarded as a human resource. They are literally referring to our children as human capital today. Nothing has changed, you guys. It's not some new thing that everybody got together in Davos and discussed, last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This has been going on since the Rockefeller era. Okay? No more Ben Franklins or Tom Edisons would be allowed. They set a bad example. One way to manage this is to see that all individuals were prevented from taking up their working lives until an advanced age when the ardor of youth and its insufferable self-confidence had cooled. And then he talks about extending childhood, another thing that they wanted to do. So this history, do you think this history might be good to know? Do you think if you're trying to reform schools and maybe you're, a policy wonk or even a parent who's talking about school reform, it might be good to know that you're not reforming them at all when you grow them with things like school choice and make government bigger and help them reach into the private sector schools, that you're actually just continuing in the same philosophical vein as before. But if you don't know this, you don't know this. So history is kind of important. Don't you think? From the beginning, there was a purpose behind forced schooling, purpose which had nothing to do with what parents, kids, or communities wanted. Instead, this grand purpose was forged out of what a highly centralized corporate economy and system of finance bent on internationalizing itself. Wait, that sounds very familiar. Internationalizing itself was thought to need. That and what a strong centralized political state needed. School was looked upon from the first decade of the 20th century as a branch of industry and a tool of governance. Where have we heard this before? It's all about our democracy. For a considerable time, probably provoked by a climate of official anger and contempt directed against immigrants and the greatest displacement of people in history, social managers of schooling were remarkably candid about what they were doing. In a speech he gave before businessmen prior to the First World War, Woodrow Wilson made this unabashed disclosure. We want one class to have a liberal education. We want another class, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. By 1917, the major administrative jobs in American schooling were under the control of a group referred to in the press of that day as the Education Trust. The first meeting of this trust included representatives of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago, and the National Education Association. The Union. The chief end, wrote Benjamin Kidd, the British evolutionist in 1918, was to impose on the young the ideal of subordination. So, that's 1918 and it's 2024 and here we are. That history might be interesting to know if you're trying to think about why our schools suck. Then we have this book called Cleo's Bastards. This book is by Canadian professor Curtis McManus. And there is a part in here that he calls the History Wars. It's right at the beginning. So you don't have to go far. He says history wars erupted right across the Western world in the 1990s and 2000s. Now, this is where I disagree. I think it started earlier, as I just read to you. I think given that that was the purpose of school, I don't think that history was meant to be taught accurately from the very beginning. But as an open, engagement of two sides in the what history is and ought to do and be, he's probably right. So from that perspective, here we go. I know he's in Canada, but I think it's the same here in this regard. The only thing that raged here, Canada, was not a war, but silence. Only two historians fought in the history wars in any meaningful public way, and Canada's philosophers seem to have been, and possibly, even more silent than our historians, for we in Canada do not like dissent. I've not noticed. The very first English-speaking settlements in this country were comprised largely of loyalists. They were called loyalists because they were loyal to King George, and after the American Revolution against the king broke out in 1776, tens of thousands of them came to Canada, for they did not like dissent. And so it has gone ever since. The wars in the 1990s, though, struck with great ferocity through the West, including a reluctant Canada, and were fought between what we will call loosely the traditionalists, I guess that would be me, and the sociological progressivists, or suckprogs, a designation that the thoughtful reader will relish for its unexpected but pleasing Bolshevik Orwellian tint. The history wars were wide-ranging and struck the very core of the discipline itself. The content of history was upended, its goals were altered, and the very way in which the discipline is practiced was fundamentally reordered and turned upside down. Traditional modes of inquiry were hastily and unthinkingly rejected, just as unthinkingly replaced with radical new sociological approaches to the study of the past. These changes greeted with glee by most, and with something approaching very real and genuine horror by the rest, mutilated and disfigured one of the oldest and proudest disciplines in the academy. And this deformation occurred right across the West, in the United States, Britain, Australia, Canada, and elsewhere. Depressingly, the dynamics of the history wars in each country, the issues and ideas at play, and indeed oftentimes the very language used were in almost all instances precisely the same, mostly because in all instances the cause of the war was the same. To put it simply, but not to oversimplify, the sociologists came and war followed with them. In the broadest sense, the Sock-Progs went to war with the traditionalists over who and what ought to be the subject of historical inquiry. Down to the 1960s, traditionalists in most Western nations tended to focus on politics, war, diplomacy, and the nation. Historians charted the growth, maturation, and development of their countries, and these histories were often written in celebratory, providential, almost teleological terms. That approach to history was shattered in the 60s, and that shattering later morphed into the history wars of the 90s. In both ages, the Sock-Progs canceled and then exiled this type of top-down approach to the past, and instead placed at the center of their history the marginalized, the disinherited, the voiceless, and the powerless. Again, sound familiar? So this is, we're starting to get it. Now, this book is a favorite of mine because I think it helps explain specifically America's problem. This book is by Mary Grabar. You should all read it. It's excellent. I did an interview with her on my channel. You can go search it and watch it at your leisure. It's called Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America. Probably the most important influence on me in terms of putting together this show and trying to explore this topic with you and get people fired up about how we teach history in America, specifically history of America, because she went through Zinn's book. If you're not familiar with Howard Zinn's People's History, it's an abomination, but it was so widely adopted across this country that there are people in their the people who are parents right now who truly believe it is the definitive text that truthfully describes American history, truthfully. I'm going to read from Mary's introduction. This will also impress upon you why his book was so influential. In Good Will Hunting, an emotionally scarred 20-year-old working class genius endorses a people's history of the United States. During his first visit to his therapist, Will Hunting looks over the books in the office and reads a title aloud, A History of the United States, Volume 1. Then comments, if you want to read a real history book, read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. That book will knock you on your ass. This is in a movie. The message is clear. Zinn's history stands superior to all multi-volume histories of America. A genius says so. Will is a natural genius in both math and history. In a bar scene early on in the movie, he inserts himself into a conversation in which Clark, a Harvard graduate student, is challenging a friend who's trying to start a conversation with some young women by pretending to be a Harvard student. Clark challenges Will's friends by asking if he can provide some insight into the evolution of the market economy in the early colonies. Will, observing Clark's mini academic disquisition on the economic modalities of the Southern colonies, jumps into the conversation saying, of course, that's your contention. You're a first-year grad student. You just finished some Marxian historian, Pete Garrison, probably, and you're going to be convinced of that until next month when you get to James Lemon, and you're going to be talking about how the economies of Virginia and Pennsylvania were strongly entrepreneurial and capitalist back in 1740. That's going to last until sometime next year, and then you'll be in here regurgitating Gordon Wood about, the pre-revolutionary utopia and the capital-forming effects of the military mobilization. When the grad student begins quoting from the monograph Work in Essex County, Will completes his sentence and gives the page number. As the bar patrons look on with awe, Will accuses the Harvard student of trying to impress the girls and predicts that in 50 years, he may start thinking for himself and realize he spent $150,000 for an education he could have gotten for $1.50 in library late fees. In this devastating exchange, Will has knocked down 3 historians in quick succession, leaving only the great Howard Zinn standing. Matt Damon, who played the titular character in Good Will Hunting, was a young neighbor of the Zinns in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He and his brother lived there with their divorced mother, an education professor, who raised her boys with deep social consciousness. According to Zinn, when Damon was 10, he took the family copy of the newly published People's History to school and read from it to his class for Columbus Day. And Matt Damon is far from the only American kid who has bought into Howard Zinn's take on our history. Zinn's version of our past, from the discovery of America, Columbus committed genocide, through slavery, worse here than anywhere in world history, the founding of the United States, white slave owners scheming to preserve the status quo, World War II, the Allies weren't any better than the Nazis, and Vietnam, yay, plucky commies defeat the evil American war machine, is widely taught and believed. In fact, it's become enshrined as an integral part of young Americans' beliefs. And no wonder. A people's history is taught throughout our schools and colleges. A young people's history of the United States, Zinn's history adapted for middle schoolers with simplified sentences, but the same content tells young readers that Zinn's radically different version of history was adapted for them, precisely because because of parents and teachers' demands. But some adults might object because they feel that young people are not mature enough to look at their nation's policies honestly. So they set up they triangulate with parents in a straw man argument that parents may not want you to read this. So of course the kids are like, yeah, let me read it. And the rest is a false history. And she goes through chapter by chapter explaining the really bad parts of this book. And even as a homeschooler, I've run into parents starting homeschooling, putting out, ads for they want to start a co-op. I'll be teaching the people's history. Who wants to join? It's the best book ever. This is what I'm going to teach my kids, a correct history of the United States. And that's homeschool. There is no modality of education that is immune to this. Nobody else has a lock on what the right history is, and you need to be skeptical. Chapters in this book. So you get, Columbus bad, Indians good. The Life of Zinn, Howard Zinn's Usable Indian, America the Racist, Casting a Pall on the Finest Hour, Writing the Red Menace Out of History. He's red-washed the curriculum. They don't know who Mao is. They don't know who Stalin is. And to the extent that they do, they're misunderstood. Misrepresented, misunderstood by a biased America, full of jingos and, people who are lying, basically. Black mascots for Red Revolution, how the communists, he's celebrating the manipulation of the Black civil rights movement by Soviet communists and making it like a good thing that they were used as mascots when in fact that's not the case. Ho 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 Chi Minh, Howard Zinn and the Commies Win, and then Howard Zinn, The Founders and Us. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And lastly, I went on a search for but why? Why did America get so, or Americans in the 20th century in particular, late 20th century? We know why the elite wanted to industrialize education. It's all there. I read it. I mean, there's more to it, obviously. We understand why the academics, because a lot of them were, social justice people coming out of the 60s, and they were literal Marxists, even Howard Zinn, why they want to do it. But why did we Americans, average Americans, buy into it? Why did we at any level say, yeah, maybe we do suck. Maybe it's true. Maybe we were lied to. Maybe when we were in school and my 5th grade teacher told us that George Washington was a great man, she was lying. Why did we so quickly decide that beating ourselves up was a great pastime? And then I went and found this book. This is a relatively old, well, I wouldn't say old, but it's not a book that we talk about much anymore. And I think we ought to. It was published in 2008. It is called Why We Hate Us by Dick Meyer. Okay. And there's a section in the book called The Limits of Me. And it struck me that it somehow relates. Maybe you'll agree. And then I'll take some of your comments. Self-awareness, self-realization, self-actualization, and self-fulfillment have become the measures of emotional and existential health. The triumph of the therapeutic. Abigail Shrier has written about this quite extensively. As sociologist Philip Rieff called it. But being so self-centered is a retreat. And in the 1970s, Lasch, this is another historian, saw selves retreating from religion, politics, hometowns, high culture, and even history, from duties and have-tos. Americans have also lost touch with what Lasch called historical continuity and think little about how they fit into past and future generations of their families, communities, and country. A simple example now is primetime television. There are no historical shows on anymore. Shows such as Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Hogan's Heroes, Little House on the Prairie, McHale's Navy, Bat Masterson, Combat, MASH, or The Untouchables. Historical movies, westerns, war movies, Gone with the Wind once were the staple of Hollywood. Now they are rare. We don't see ourselves as belonging anywhere in history or in our community. For all the talk about belonging, you ever notice there's no continuity. There's nothing about being part of the fabric of America, part of, this great tradition of the only time it comes up is right around election time. It's like our democracy, the great tradition of our democracy is voting and our democracy. We don't have a democracy, first of all. That's communism. But that's the only time anybody mentions, peaceful transfer of power. And it's like this, you're part of this very noble thing of voting, but it's completely devoid of context. So he continues, if we don't feel that we belong, the $1,000,000 question becomes, where does one look for one's authentic self and contentment? Feelings and therapy, genetics, a 4th husband or wife, the self-help aisle at Borders. What exactly is there to mold a self from besides bits and pieces of the family, culture, and community you came from? Things that have been discredited as suffocating, oppressive, inauthentic, and yes, phony. So what are the sources of self? When everything becomes about your own self, the game is over. So that struck me because to me, it seems that one of the biggest consequences, we talk a lot about the consequences of memory holing American history being that, we're going to forget what makes us great. We're going to forget why freedom is hard fought. We're going to stop respecting, we're going to hand off our freedoms. All of these are true. We're going to walk around spouting inanities and nonsense like these protesters about, Zionists are just as bad as Nazis and the, queers for Palestine and all kinds of things that are obviously historically illiterate. But we can laugh at it. But we have to remember that part of why they're so attracted to this is they have nothing. They don't, for all the talk of belonging, they belong to nothing. We've not given them anything to hold on to. We put them in school at the age of, 3. And so they don't even really belong to their families. So there's not even that continuity. They belong to whatever the school is, whatever the school manufactures, whatever history they want to write today about yesterday becomes the new thing. There is history taught today that they didn't teach when my eldest child was in high school 2 years ago. I'm telling her things that are going on in public school because, well, she wasn't in a public high school. So she was in public high school 5 years ago. She spent 1 year in public high school. And I tell her some of the stuff today, and she's like, yeah, they didn't even do that when I was there. That's how new some of this stuff is. So the gender stuff for sure, brand new, but even some of the history, even some of the things they're teaching, 1619 Project, all this, she's like, yeah, they didn't do that when I was there. The stuff they taught me was crap, but it wasn't that version of crap. So that's how fast this stuff is evolving. And these kids who've been in the system the whole time, even they don't remember. They don't remember last week. They certainly don't know. If you ask them what is December 7th, 1941, you can almost guarantee that most of them are go, I don't know. Is that important? What? I have no idea. Christmas? Like, they're not going to know. There are adults who don't know. And that's the problem. So where do you fit? Of course, you feel like you have to rewrite history. And that was also part of the Marxian thing. It's like, we'll get to the end of it. History will end. We will achieve perfect communism and history will end. We'll be done. We'll be done evolving. We're done. But it's a lot harder to get people motivated to do that if they feel part of any kind of history, if they feel part of that. One of the things that grounded me so much as a kid were those stories that I told you. I am part of this. My grandfather survived, and that's the only reason I'm here. And he went and fought, and Europe is free. And then, other relatives could come. Not just other relatives of mine, but other people's relatives, people who are now in this country whose parents wouldn't have been able to come to this country, or maybe came because they were fleeing from something over there. It reshaped the world, but we're part of that. We're part of that. And our children are part of that. They don't feel part of that. Why would they? And in fact, they're running headlong away from it. Ew, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, I'm part of a bad culture that dropped atom bombs. Well, if you read Mary's book, you get a little different perspective on that. They've gone and taken the worst possible interpretation of that. We killed a lot of people. Yes, but why? but why did we? It wasn't a flippant decision. What was happening? Do you understand anything about the culture of Japan at the time? No, you don't. Did you learn the history of that? No, you didn't. Did you learn about their expansionist goals? What they did in China? No, you didn't. So of course, if you're looking at it in this vacuum of innocent Japanese person, just like the guy who makes my sushi, no different, exactly the same, thinks the same, then you think dropping an atom bomb on that person is horrible. Of course you would. And I mean, some of you out there might go, well, Deb, it's still pretty horrible. Yeah. Detonating a nuclear weapon is objectively horrible, but it doesn't necessarily make it evil. It may have been like the best option from a menu of shit sandwiches. And you aren't going to really be able to make a fair determination without knowing a lot more context. And our kids aren't getting it. They're not getting it at all. And I've kind of just explained a little bit why, but I'm going to go through more of your comments and see what else we've got in here. So let's see. Tony Baloney says the first secret society was known as the Brotherhood of the Snake, precursor to Freemasonry, and they're changing history into history. That's cute. And then I'm blown away by Crystal's comment about the most recent history through time. It blows my mind. Fit American says demographic change in schools, largest districts are majority South Central American kids. They have zero connection to American history. Their parents have zero connection. Accurate, very true. However, we are a nation of immigrants. And that was always the case at that time. So in other words, as I said, when my grandfather's parents came from Russia, they didn't even speak a word of English. They didn't have any connection to American history. They knew their own history of Russia and whatever they were taught. They came here, they knew very, very little. But in part because of the way that schools operated, and even as bad as public school was then, as far as what its goals allegedly were, they still took great pains to teach about the founding of America, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It was really important for them to know this stuff. And my great grandparents did become American citizens. They learned enough English to do that. They took their tests, they studied their stuff, and then they felt part of it. They absolutely did, because the social pressures were different. The pride that we took in passing on the history and telling people, like, this is the new country that you've come to, that we're asking you to assimilate, but once you do, you're going to become part of the fabric, part of that quilt, right? The melting pot that is America. You will be part of it. You're building that history. Then tomorrow you are literally part of it, because you're here now. And my grandfather felt that way, and that's part of why he felt motivated to go. He didn't have to sign up to be in either war. He wasn't going to be drafted in either case, and yet he did. And he would have told you, he told me, the reason it was because he felt part of it. Even though he was first generation American, he absolutely felt part of it, because American history was nothing people were ashamed of. And, there's so much talk about, oh, it was all propaganda, it was all positive. Even though I went to school in the 70s, as I told you, elementary school, and I still have somewhere here my paper that I wrote in, I think it was 4th grade, about the Civil War in cursive. I think I have it literally right here. Let's see if I got it. I can put my hands on it. This is old stuff, but I showed it during one of my shows. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. 4th grade, Deb's paper. Drew those. Very proud of myself. Freehand. But there it is. The Civil War in cursive. Look at the teacher's pretty handwriting. Look how pretty that is. And this was, I had to have an outline. Okay. The South, the North, all this. I learned about slaves. I learned about all of this stuff. I had to read about it, write about it. 4th grade. Don't tell me. Public school. Garden Variety, Tenafly, New Jersey. Public school. Nothing fancy. So don't tell me it's not possible, and don't tell me we didn't do it. We did do it. And there were kids from all different backgrounds, nationalities at my school. And the fact that these kids are coming here today, it's not that so many are from such and such a places. It's we don't expect anything from them. The schools we have don't. In fact, quite the opposite. They'll come in and be told they're victims. They'll come in and be told that they don't need to learn our history because our history is bad. It's oppressive. It might even offend them or upset them or traumatize them. We wouldn't want to do that. In fact, let's teach their history, the history of the country they just came from and left. And how great and fabulous. It's so fabulous, they had to run away. Oopsie. Wait, I guess that would be a problem. Can't teach that. So they're just aimless. It is a problem. So I agree with you, Fit American, that we have the demographic change as a really relevant piece of information, but all the more reason that we need to be teaching the newcomers about American history so they can feel part of it. So they absolutely can. Tony Baloney says, I have a book that can't be found in used rare bookstores. It shows that Freemasonry has at least 90 degrees, not the 33 degrees that are shown to people. Wow. See, that's the thing. There are books. Somebody posted pictures of a book from like the 1600s of somebody who went to then, I don't know what it was called, like the Holy Land. They were doing it mostly for like religious purposes, but they were documenting all the names of the towns and who lived there and the churches and the this and that. And there were no Arab words, Arab names of things, etc. They had other Greek names. They had some Turkish stuff. I think there was, different things, but they didn't have, I think it was like one Arab village. And then the populations of places, mostly Christians, mostly Jews, etc. Spoke from the 1600s. Kind of changes the narrative, right? And most of it was called Israel, according to this person. Adrian says, consider this. It took a long time to reconstruct the family tree on my mother's side because the Soviets destroyed so much of it. Now, I think your family is from, is it Latvia or is it, what's the other one with an L? You'll tell me, I'm sure. Oh, I'm forgetting. It's Estonia. Were you guys Estonian? They destroyed so much. I mean, yeah, the Soviets destroyed a lot of history. That's a big thing that conquering people do. And then Tony says, Deb, when you have time, check this book out, Mao's America Survivor's Warning. Yes, that is, I actually have the audiobook. It is on my list. Hi, Lone Dissenter. How are you? So yeah, I'm pretty proud of this. Glad I saved it. I got a check plus plus. Check plus plus. There is on my SS content, my social studies content. Now, I'm still not thrilled that they called this social studies, but even then they weren't going, now let's talk mostly about the marginalized. No, it was like, let's look at the history, the dates, the places, etc. And then I got a check plus plus for language. Well written, very good. Your handwriting is showing improvement. Isn't that funny that okay, handwriting is showing improvement. Do you think your average fourth grader could write that today? And my handwriting was crap for the time period. So I had classmates, really pretty handwriting. Mine was messy by comparison. So that's don't tell me it's not possible. Every time I meet with people and younger teachers, even younger parents, like, well, you can't expect that. And these kids are so young and they don't know and nobody else is doing it. Me. And I'm like, I hate to sound like I'm 100 years old and some kind of like crotchety old, lady, but you're really underestimating children when it comes to history. First of all, I think it's one of the things they could be the most interested in. It's so relevant in terms of story. Think about it. It's stories. It's literally stories. Kids love stories. It's the story of us. It's literally the story of humans. What is more interesting than that? I have over there somewhere on one of the shelves, I have the I think it's like the World History Atlas. Crystal probably knows it. Big thick book full of pictures, all kinds of color, amazing, whatever. And if you go to the very beginning of the book and you open it up, there is a timeline showing the sort of the history of human life on the planet, or just the history of the planet, basically. And there's this huge long line, no people, like millions of years, and then people. And then we go from, a lot of time. Oh, we started writing. Oh, industrial, whatever. And I remember my kids, when we were first homeschooling, they would obsess over this page. They were just like, Mom, is this true? Like, that's a lot of years with no people. And I'm like, I know, it's a lot of years with no people. And I mean, they were like obsessed with it. Like, I mean, so people have only been here for, yeah, this like that much time. It put things in perspective for them. They had a completely different appreciation for things. The first series of books that they read were what they call the Jack and Annie books, but they're called the Magic Treehouse books. What do they do in the Magic Treehouse? They have a book that time travels them to periods of history. They loved them, couldn't put them down. I'm not saying every kid's the same. I'm just saying it's the story of humans. Why would kids not be interested? Why do we assume they wouldn't? And teachers don't assume they wouldn't. They just, it's not prioritized. They don't know a lot of history. They're intimidated by it, so they don't teach it. And they're motivated to teach something else, which brings me to the next round of stuff that I want to show you. Because I want to be fair and show you that the debate about what we should teach in history is old. I brought up the Zinn stuff. So this is from Time, obviously biased to the left. This is from 2020. It says Trump's threat to pull funding from schools over how they teach slavery is part of a long history of politicizing American history class. And the reason I'm showing you this is not because I agree with this article or anything like that. This is true. And I read for you. There's a long history of what do we teach in history class and why, and it depends on who's in power. And the reason I'm showing you this is again, the history of this conflict is important when you're talking about school reform. And to me, it illustrates so perfectly the folly of having government decide any of this. This would not be an issue. You would have decentralized control over what history you teach. Just like I said, if I have 300 million people, each walking around favoring a different version. So, this group wants Howard Zinn, this group over here wants Wood, this one thinks Mayor Graybar is the greatest expert on everything, this one over here. No one of them has enough people to control us all and control what history is. It's a lot easier to remain free. And the same goes for schools. If you want to have the people's school of Howard Zinn and it's totally private and the free market gets to decide whether kids, know enough about what, let it happen. I don't care. But as soon as the government controls all this, it's just us versus them versus us versus them, back and forth, who's in power. And there's only one. And then all the kids have to learn this. And then we have a big swing back the other way. And then all the kids have to learn something else. So as this article points out, it says, with the nation divided along political lines amid ever-mounting suspicion of supposed outside influences undermining American security, not supposed, it's true, a group of powerful people decided to go right to the root of what they saw as the problem. American students, they believe, were being taught a skewed version of their own history that was designed to weaken patriotism. To stop the corrosion, someone would have to intervene. Well, again, it is true. They're actively trying to corrode patriotism. That is not up for discussion. They openly admit it, okay? This scenario may sound familiar, but it didn't take place just last week when President Trump threatened the funding of California schools to teach 1619, which reframes the country's origins around the arrival of first enslaved Africans, et cetera, et cetera. But it says, but in fact, this scenario could have taken place in the aftermath of the Civil War or in 1917 or in 1948. And that is true. That is factually correct, as I pointed out to you. At each of these times, there were shifts in, well, now we need to teach this stuff. Well, no, now it's important we teach this stuff. And history is probably the biggest political football in terms of how we teach what we teach. More than English, although English is definitely up there, more than science and more than math. And now, of course, they're looping all those in too. But history they started with the fight over what to teach for history first, and it's been going on the longest. And it has had, in my opinion, the most devastating effect on our sense of everything, our individual sense of our belonging in this country and being part of it, something worth preserving. Why people didn't used to feel like, I need to go find my tribe and find my, my identities. It's like, I'm an American. What? Maybe you were an Irish American, maybe you were an Italian American. Okay, fine, whatever. You had some like ethnic loyalty. But you didn't have people, even the people at the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City when I was growing up, still saw themselves as, Puerto Rican Americans. They still felt like we're part of the fabric of America. They weren't just, we're Puerto Ricans stuck living in America, which is how I feel like most people feel today. It says, so it's no surprise that historians' collective reaction to Trump's tweet and a similar sentiment expressed earlier this summer by Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton's introduction of the Saving American History Act of 2020 was one of deja vu. The teaching of U.S. history in public schools has always been political, and such concerns about whether curricula are anti-American are par for the course in moments of turmoil. It's the story of history education in this country, says historian and former AP U.S. history teacher Lindsay Marshall, cycle after cycle of political anxiety manifesting in, well, obviously we're teaching our own history wrong, and that's the problem. Absolutely correct. That is true. So even the history of this is important to know. So, like I said, to me, this is just another argument for not having government doing it at all. And then we have another Time article, American students need history, but not for the reasons you're hearing. And this is obviously more of an opinion piece. Also, this is from 2015, so way before that first one. So, just keep that in mind. In 2020, they're talking about Trump and this and that, but let's go back to 2015. Back to school season is here, and with it all the familiar trappings, save one. Whereas in recent years, national discussion has seemingly centered on America's deficits in math and science, this year deficits in U.S. history are sharing the spotlight. At the close of this past school year, an alarm was sounded after the most recent national assessment. The NAEP showed that mere 18% of eighth graders were proficient in U.S. history. So take that population, the 2015 let's say somebody graduated in 2015. By 2020, they've graduated college. So they weren't proficient in history. Now they went through college. This is before Trump is elected. So there's already people in the Republican Party, on the right, et cetera, all through the country, myself included, saying, kids don't know enough history. They don't know enough American history. We got to do something. We got to do something. They're teaching it wrong, or they're not teaching it at all. And in comes a new president and says, okay, we're going to do something different. Just because I might have agreed with, let's say, and not all of his take, but let's say I agreed with the impetus for, that, I still, like I said, I still thought this isn't going to end it. So then you're not president anymore, and we go back the other way. But we still had a population of teachers, students, parents who had the kind of education and history that brought us to 18%. 18% isn't something that happens in 1 year. It doesn't happen overnight. 18% tells you we've had decades of just simply not learning anything. It's not like there's taught history wrong and didn't teach it at all, because the test is obviously mapped to what they taught. So even if you don't like what they're teaching, they didn't even learn that. So, is it they taught it wrong? Or they're taught the wrong stuff, or they're teaching it poorly? Even if it's a bunch of lies, they couldn't even pass a test on the bunch of lies. So my takeaway is that we have a generation of people, at least, who just don't see it as important. They just don't see history as relevant, not important. And that's the problem. We could battle back and forth at what they should teach or they shouldn't teach, whatever. How about we need to make history important, and we need to explain why, and we need to do a better job of teaching the teachers, or at least hiring teachers who are proficient at this and interested in this and passionate about this and actually care about making sure that Americans, if one of the arguments for having a public school system in the first place, I understand what the Rockefellers wanted, but if one of our arguments today is because democracy, we want them to know about the country so they can vote intelligently and, really want to preserve liberty, blah, 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 whatever your argument is, then shouldn't they be able to do that? Shouldn't they actually know enough to be able to do that? Shouldn't they know what the Constitution is, what it says and what it doesn't, what a right is and what it isn't? When I see a Harvard graduate standing on a stage saying my right to civil disobedience was violated, something's really wrong. That's Harvard. If you made it all the way through Harvard and you think you have a right to be civilly disobedient, that you shouldn't get arrested, that that's not the point of civil disobedience, something went awry along the way. Because I can promise you that I knew probably in 8th grade, when learning about the civil rights movement, that the point of the lunch counter sit-ins was to get arrested. Either they were going to be allowed to stay there, in which, yay, win, or they get arrested, and that would be the thing. But not today. It's a right, because we don't know anything about the Constitution. So there's that. Then I found from 2013, something from Thought Catalog, 20 things most Americans don't know about history. And this goes through a bunch of stuff that are pretty random things. They're not really like, I don't know, Vikings never wore horned helmets. Interesting, but not central to, whatever. All of these are more trivia than history. You might find some of them more important than others, but it's another way to make history interesting to kids. If they like trivia, then, you can say, hey, here's some stuff. Then I found some stuff about today, what people are saying today about history. And I want to show it to you because it shows you what they think is important for kids to know today, what is being taught in schools today, and why I think most parents need to get more active in evaluating what their children are being taught. So this is Teach for America. When will history be taught honestly? This is from 2020. More than a third of Arcadia's 3,000 residents, blah, 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 are Latinx. Well, first of all, if we're going to teach honest history, we would teach that this is completely counter to Spanish language. You don't get to make up your own language to talk about a people's history. All right. With roots in countries including Honduras and Guatemala. So what? Okay. Has it been taught dishonestly, or were things prioritized differently? This is what McManus is talking about with these sock progs. That's what that is. Now we've got to talk about the Latinx people of this little area in this little town, because otherwise we're being dishonest. Recent years, and especially months, have seen a doubling down of calls for more such efforts, not without political pushback and debate. But if your child's history class talks about how politically inconvenient or unpopular it is that they're teaching it, then they're teaching it to be political. And that's not the point of learning history. It's a history of us, the story of us. Then we have this charming thing, iCivics. Play a game. Everything's a game. This is how we learn civics. We play a game. Everything's got to be fun. Like, it can't possibly be fun unless it has a game controller, right? If you see the word reimagines in relation to civics or history, run. Well, if you see the word reimagines in an educational setting, run. For American democracy, again, we're a republic. So all of this is just this communist thing, whatever. Look at this. Our strategy: catalyze a movement. Equity is at the center, right? Evolve for impact. iCivics has launched an ambitious 5-year strategic plan to seize this moment. That's revolutionary talk. Of unprecedented support for our cause and to build on the great progress we have made. So we are full into, let's take the teaching of history and civics, and they really shouldn't be separated. What is the point of civics without historical context? Why do I vote? Why does this matter? Why does any of this matter? Why is our government structured this way? It's easy for them to say, it shouldn't be. We should have direct bureaucracy. Let's not tell them the history of why we have an electoral college. Shh. Okay? But this is what this is. And then, of course, we have the charming Learning for Justice. Oh, look, SPLC. Just for frame of reference, I'm blocked on Southern Poverty Law Center's X account. I'm so scary that I'm not allowed to see their account, their tweets. Like, think about that for a second. Here we have Learning for Justice, which provides pretty much free classroom resources, lessons, student texts, student tasks, teaching strategies, a learning plan builder. And you can go in, they want you to, classroom resources. Let's check out some of their lessons. Learning for Justice provides me with the means to promote social justice, challenge bias, and engage students in discussion about justice. This is supposed to be a history curriculum. Now, are there options that schools are not using but should be? Yes, of course there are. Namely, 1776 Unites. Now, here's who's behind that. You have wonderful Black educators, a lot of it, and writers and so on. Oops, sorry. I'm an idiot. Okay. A lot of it is Black history, but it's not all Black history. It's not all Black history. And so you have Bob Woodson here, who wrote Red, White, and Black. I highly recommend this for teaching Black history, but also just American history. The American history in here is more accurate than the American history, whether it's Black history or not. Even the just stuff around it is more accurate and apolitical than the stuff at any of those others. But they're not using this in the schools. You can use this. There might be a teacher here or there at a charter school that's using it, but no. So you see what happens. And because we have a standards-based curriculum now, not a knowledge-based curriculum, where the government that funds these schools says you just have to teach this standard, cover the Declaration, cover the Civil Rights Movement, cover the Civil War. Okay, I will cover it the way I want to cover it, with the materials I choose, with materials my school chooses, materials my working group of teachers chooses. Not, this is the approved text for the state of blah, blah, blah. And I still disagree with that, by the way. Like, just so we're clear, when I'm telling you this is better than that, it's like kind of like crap, slightly less crap, okay, we sprayed some perfume on the crap. Okay. It's not, none of it will ever be as good as it not existing. But if you're going to do this in this setting, having one approved resource that all the teachers need to teach, and they will be held accountable for the students knowing things. So in other words, the students will know what the Declaration of Independence says, when it was written, who wrote it, why they wrote it, etc. What were the arguments for it, against it, things like that. Students will know what the Bill of Rights contains, what the first, 10 amendments are, etc. Okay? Then they have to know things. The student has to own the knowledge and demonstrate that they own the knowledge, that it's up here somewhere. You might say, well, it's just a test, Deb. They won't remember it. Okay, you say that. But as much as I might not have remembered every last little detail of all that stuff, 1983, by the way, the year I graduated high school, was the year that they got rid of the knowledge-based curriculum. So I still had it, thank God, when I was in school. But I may not have remembered every last little detail, but I sure as hell knew who won the damn Civil War. If you stopped me on the street, I knew that. And then that was reinforced again in college and so on. And we now have more people going to college than ever before. The difference is they're going and they can completely ignore learning any of this stuff. And they didn't learn it in high school or middle school in the first place. So there's that. So, that's the thing. All right. Last little look at the comments and then we will wrap up. Okay. Learn to Center says, are you neater than a fourth grader? Today, I might be. I don't know. It depends on where if the fourth grader's in like a classical Catholic school, maybe not. Nomo says, unless you were forced to make and eat hardtack in the cradle of the Confederacy, aka the birthplace of the civil rights, you have yet to fully experience the real South. I'm sure that's true. Tony Baloney says, I can relate. Teachers called my mom to tell her I had a potty mouth, but they also told her that my penmanship was so good, even the curse words are beautiful. I remember very well, I was in 5th grade, the first time I said a curse word and no one was around and I was walking home from school and I remember wondering if I could do it. Like, I remember saying okay, I'm going to say this word out loud. Nobody's here to hear it. I'm going to see what it feels like to say it in my mouth, and I can't remember if it was shit or it was something like that. And I was like I just said the word and I was like, oh my God, I was a 5th grader. You can imagine 5th graders today. Oh my God, they'd make fun of me. But I remember being so horrified at I'm going to try it. Nobody's here. Let's see what it feels like. And Nomo says, just watch Roots. It will tell you what you need to know. Yeah, it'll tell you all the false history you need to know. Kunta Kinte. Yeah, they didn't do that. That's not how they got the slaves, but I guess it makes a good story. And Tony says, no more. Yes, I agree. I'm from New York City. We consider giving people the finger as the highest form of artistic expression. I would love to see the history they're showing the kids in North Korea. Obviously, it's totally false. David says, I had coloring books of famous pirates, buccaneers, and privateers, each page having a preface page with the story of the individual. Yes, that's a great one too. And then Tony Baloney says, notice how the cartoon people in the Learning for Justice page have no eyes because they can't see. That is funny that you said that. Let me go back to that because they use the weirdest art. This is what he's talking about, just to show you. See, no eyes. They do this a lot. This is like the art style that they use. And then they have these drawings, but it's almost always people who are like the heroes that they show. They have Martin Luther King over there, but they really focus heavily on the heroes of the left. They really do. And they make heroes out of people who are not heroes, like, Angela Davis. But I'm looking to see if I can find some of my my other books I want to show you to make history fun for kids. Let's see. I can oh, I'm going to get one. Hold on. Okay. Look at see, should the government? Nope. All right. This is a good example of a book. This is called Who Wins? 100 historical figures go head to head and you decide the winner. I don't see why kids wouldn't find this hilariously funny. But what you do is you pick, so each of these turns, so you have who wins on all these categories, and then you flip it over. We've got George Washington, and I'm going to randomly go Benjamin Franklin, first American. And so then they have a discussion about it. And on the back of each character, they have details about, this is Albert Einstein, but on the back facing, rather, I should say. So wherever George Washington was, well, I missed him. Here we go. So there's the stuff about George Washington. And I probably got it wrong. So here's George Washington. Here's Benjamin Franklin. The kids have to read it. They have little known facts about them. Then they have to decide. If you have two kids, they can debate, or they can just decide and, you know, discuss it with you and make a case why they think this person would win on all these categories, whatever. It's, you know, it's a little bit silly, but the facts are the facts. And they can go head to head with people who didn't even live at the same time. So those two live at the same time. You could pick Jackie Robinson and Ben Franklin. I mean, go nuts. But I find that for kids in like elementary school, this is really fun. And it works on their reading at a higher level without them having to sit and read a chapter book, and they're learning history. There are resources galore. Do you think they have this in a school? No, they don't. They have this crap online. And they're moving more and more to teaching history online, whether it's Khan Academy or some of the other online things that have adaptive learning and AI. And you need to really worry about the history that's being put out by AI, because it just gobbles up all this other stuff and then spits things out, full answers to questions. Kids don't even think it through. This, they have to actually think it through and, you know, have a conversation and have some fun with it. And this is just one example. The Street Through Time is another thing. I have books up there that are a whole book about the Renaissance, a whole book about medieval times. I'm sure Crystal, if she's still out there, has used these books. So the big, I think it's DM or whatever. Is it DM? I'm gonna go look again. These guys. All right. I'm just going to grab all this stuff. Sorry, guys. I have a lot of books. Okay. So we've got all kinds of things. You've got the DK. These, like Amelia Earhart. They have one for like every person. Doesn't have to be boring. And you can read these to kids. They can read them. Then we have American Heroes Every Kid Should Meet. This is a great book. Why not? Like, why don't they have this? We've got, these are some of my favorite. These Adventures In books. These take little kids, like what it was like to be a kid in ancient Egypt. So it's the Good Times Travel Agency books. They have all kinds of versions of history. My kids loved these. Then we have some of the best ever, the Dolaires. The George Washington and the Lincoln are fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. A little bit, you know, some people have criticized it because they've said it's, you know, it's too shiny and clean about George Washington. Come on. The guy was pretty amazing, and this brings him to life, and the illustrations are beautiful. It's a fantastic book, right? The Greek Myths book by Dolaires is also amazing. You can't find the Adventures In books. They used to be so easy to get. See, here's another example. When I first started homeschooling, so back in 2000, let me think, this would be 2008. All these things I'm showing you, you trip over them. It was so easy to get them. If it's hard for her to get these now, that tells you something. And when school choice passes and it has to be, you know, you got to buy things that are acceptable, the blah, blah, blah for whatever, it might get harder. People are going to be racing to like, oh, there's an out of the box curriculum that it's easy. They'll take my voucher. Oh, here it is. But then history is going to be whatever the voucher is going to be easily buy, what you can easily find. What am I going to get online? What do I not have to think about? And it's really sad. These are some of my favorites. If you lived at the time of, So we have all kinds of books. I have If You Lived at the Time of the American Revolution, there's If You Lived at the Time of the Drafting the Constitution, and they go into detail about what it was like for your family. Would you have seen battle? Why wouldn't kids like these? They do. Here's another one, Witness to Revolution, Abigail Adams. This is a great book. This is for a little older kid, but also great. And especially if you're trying to teach more about women in history. And then these were the ones I was talking about, the eyewitness books that cover just about everything. These are great, with lots of pictures, but also really good facts. And there's one for pretty much every historical period. There's medieval life. They have ancient Greece. They have ancient Rome. And then if you want to have some fun, because I have a dark sense of humor, so I always wanted my kids to have fun with history. The awful ends of the awfully famous. How they croaked. I would always pick up funny books like this, and my kids were very interested in how people died. I know I have a very strange sense of humor. We have King Tut, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Christopher Columbus, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, Pocahontas, Galileo, Mozart, Marie Antoinette, George Washington, Napoleon Bonaparte, Ludwig van Beethoven, Edgar Allan Poe, Dickens, James Garfield, Charles Darwin, Marie Curie, and Albert Einstein. And you have to admit, they had some pretty interesting deaths, those people. So, and their deaths, we're not just interesting in how they happened, but in the historical context. Guess what the kid also learns? Oh, Marie Antoinette had her head chopped off by a guillotine. When? Why? Why were they doing that? What was going on? Oh my goodness, they were chopping heads off lots of people. That's terrible. Okay. And they don't need to be in high school, because you came at it from the how they died, how they croak. These were famous people. Let's see how they died. They don't have an emotional attachment to them, so they don't really care. It just becomes something funny to study. So now I'm trying to end on an up note, because many of you probably have kids in school and you're like, I can't do anything about what they're teaching the kids in my kids in the school as far as history goes. Well, you can look at what it is and see what's not there, and see what is there that ought not be there. And remember what I said at the beginning about owning history, so that they can't make it so hard for you to find and hard for you to do and hard for you to teach that you can't even supplement at home. So Crystal is saying, so she said the adventure books are hard to find, that she has the Dallaire books. And then the If You Live series is fabulous. My favorite. We just finished one of the Indians of the Northwest Coast. They're so good. I love them so much. And, you'll have fun if you guys are thinking about maybe I should get some of these for my kids. Do it. You'll have fun. Look through these, read them, with your kids. And if they're like, I'm not doing that, I'm totally not doing that. If it's not on a screen, I'm not doing that. Well, then, that tells you how effective the schools have been at, making it seem like this isn't interesting. If that does happen to you, another thing that I recommend is movies and old TV shows. Sometimes they'll get into that. I don't know what else to tell you, but if you're not going to pull your kids out of school and do it yourself, just recognize that history of the world, the Western world and Western civilization, and in particular, the United States, is being memory holed bit by bit every day. Books are being edited, putting in the pride flags, like Crystal said, or just, we're not publishing that anymore. We're not letting you see that. You can't buy that. You can't get it. Buy books. Buy used books if you have to. Don't throw books out if it's a history book, even textbooks, believe it or not. Even if your kids grow up and they don't want to use it or whatever, you can sell it used online and they're worth things. All the math books that my eldest daughter used, the calculus book, the algebra book she used, they were old textbooks, so they weren't edited to put in the social justice. It's gotten to that level where we have to get historical textbooks or historical versions of even a math book to make sure it's accurate. So it is happening, and you may not realize it because you're surrounded by information all day, or you go into the Barnes and Noble and there's books everywhere. I found this out the hard way too. I went in looking for a copy of Wuthering Heights not too long ago, and they still publish it, of course. But here's the other thing they do. They publish versions of books. So you have to go and look that the version you're getting is not some dumbed down, annotated, digested, re-edited version of, a Bronte book, but is actually the original. And sometimes they make it hard to tell. Like, they'll put these hardcover beautiful books like the classics, and they'll put it on a table and it's like, these are $5, whatever, or these are, they're all these beautiful hardback books. I'll buy it. And then I picked one up and I looked at it and then I compared it side by side with like the Penguin Classic or one of the more, I know this is legit, original version. And I'm flipping to the pages and I'm like, wait. Where's the what? Either they simplified some of the language or they removed an introduction, a preface, an afterword. They removed things or they put something in to start to contextualize it in the framework they want the reader to read it. And they're doing tricky little things like that, even with classic literature. So be careful when you buy versions of things or if you look for things in the library that you're not getting one that's already been twisted, because they're doing that too. So that's what yeah. Tony Baloney says, even the MSN go back and change their headlines. That is correct. Oh, Crystal, this is funny. She says, we're also reading a history of how people dealt with poop called Poop Happened. And you know what? That's relevant too, because then you realize about indoor plumbing and all these innovations and how lucky we are and how many people live for how long without being able to handle their poop. I've been snatching up as many of the classics secondhand as I can. I have a huge library. Same. I'll go to those like thrift stores, used bookstores, etc. I never leave without a book. It's getting a little out of hand, actually. And then Stop the Philosophical Zombies. Make sure to cover the Holodomor. That is such a good point. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I'm not gonna talk about it in this show because it's a whole other show, but the teaching of the Holocaust, and we tend to fixate on like the concentration camps and the things like that. But there were massacres in other locations, and not just by Germans or Germans with local help. And we don't go over that. And again, if you don't know the people involved, you don't know who they were and why they were doing the things that we're doing. It's just a really bad thing happened to these people and these people were bad then. And it becomes easy to say, well, maybe those people deserved it. No. Okay. And you might say, well, Deb, didn't you kind of imply that when you said about the Japanese and the dropping of the... No, the people in Hiroshima. I'm saying that the Japanese government had done things and was doing things and was putting their people in peril and was using their people and telling their people to commit suicide and attack anything that moved, even the children, like take your children, jump off a cliff rather than let, the Americans succeed and, kill them with a stick and all the stuff. And people were dive bombing airplanes into ships. Winning a war like that is a whole different thing. That's what I meant. It wasn't like they deserved it. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what's starting to happen now, even with the Holocaust, was, well, maybe if Jews weren't so Jewy. So we have to teach these things in context. Nomo says, soon to be empty nesters. Youngest son graduated high school a few weeks ago from a small town school in Alabama. The insanity is infiltrating even the most perceived conservative school. Absolutely. Yep. It's everywhere. Tony goes, poop happened. I hope it's not a pop-up book. I don't think it is. The last thing I'll leave you with is what Nomo is saying about it's infiltrated them, all the schools. Another reason why I'm saying to people, like, school choice isn't what your problem is. Your problem is twofold. First, philosophical. We have a serious problem in the United States about ownership of self, ownership of history, ownership of truth. And it's a real problem. We need to start pushing back on people trying to take that from us, people in positions of power trying to take away our ability to chart our own course in life, and who are openly opposed to individualism. and the idea of individual liberty and natural rights. That's just a huge problem across the board. And I don't care if the school is conservative or not conservative. If their philosophy is not solidly in, we defend individual liberty to no matter what. If they give any lip service at all to diversity, if they give any lip service at all to this notion of belonging or mental health or blah, 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 blah. I don't care if they're, genuflecting to the American flag every single day. They're missing the point. They're missing the point. It's about your individual child. One of the most pernicious things, and it's infiltrating the conservative schools more than any, is this idea that school is about college and career, and that we can identify in very young children their talents and their interests at a very young age using a computer program, and then we can orient them towards their proper career for them. This has been tried with absolute miserable results for generations, yet it sounds so tempting because it sounds like, oh yes, it's going to be very useful. It's not what school is for. It's not what school is for. So we're not what learning is for. Forget school. It might be what school is for, but it's not what getting an education should be for. And that is what's being told. It's going to be rigorous in pursuit of college and career. Take a breath. Is that really what your child is as human resource? And you'll see that sometimes in conservative schools. And rigor, is only useful if you're learning things that are worth knowing, and if you're doing things that are worth doing. And then all that rigor is you're doing them at the highest level you can do them at. That's all. And people are not underestimating your abilities. It's not arbitrarily making you read 100 pages a day of what we want you to read. I could rigorously teach you the SPLC Learning for Justice curriculum. Do 3 lessons a night. It's very rigorous. What does that even mean? So it's easy to be fooled. And when people say, we have a classical curriculum, that's another one. We have a Montessori curriculum. You still need to look at what are you teaching exactly? What is the material? And most importantly, who's teaching it? Who are these people? So we have the philosophical problem. And then we have, just the materials. What are you using? And who's doing the teaching? What is their lens? They shouldn't have a lens, first of all. But if they have one, what is it? If they're mistakenly calling I have a perspective that, each student should pursue their own, dreams and learn to the best of their ability and do their best and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. They're calling it a lens. Dumb, but they're doing it. But if they're like, everything is taught through a lens of social justice. Everything is taught through the lens of, uplifting the marginalized. Everything is taught through the lens of belonging and inclusion. No. Run. So you need to choose the teachers carefully and how they're taught. Okay, let's see. Stop the philosophical zombies is in Unit 7031. Also, Japanese and medical experience. Absolutely. Thank you. Like I said, we don't teach our kids this. They're going to go, oh, why did we drop a bomb? Like, do you want to hear what the Japanese did and maybe reconsider? Nomo says, take Fed dollars and you are perhaps unwittingly and perpetually beholden to bad ideology. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for watching. That is true. Take state dollars of any kind. And you have to understand, money's fungible. So when the federal government gives to the state, which they do for education to every state, and then the state doles out state money for school choice vouchers and so on, the federal government says, wait a minute. Wait. Now, because we give money to the state for education, that facilitates your ability to take some of your state money and distribute it out for these private things. You're benefiting from the federal money, and that's enabling you to do that. Even though you're not commingling the funds, it's still a benefit. So, you know what that means? This has already been decided in a court, by the way. You fall under all the title legislation. That's special ed. That's, non-discrimination. That's Title IX. Good luck, private schools. Have fun. So, that's what happens. And Stop the Philosophical Zombie says, did you see that Twitter thread from Michael Strong yesterday? I follow him and I saw a lot of his threads. Which one was it? Because I was retweeting a lot of his stuff yesterday. So there were several. Texas Sheep Lady says too many people don't run. That is true. They don't. They're afraid to run. They don't want to be the outlier. They want to go along. They figure. Here's the thought that goes through a lot of people's heads. And people have shared this with me. They look around. They're like, I'm the only person who feels this way. I'm the only person feeling like this is wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. They don't even have to. No one has to open their mouth to gaslight them. We're all doing it. We're fine. We have no complaints. It's kind of like this, the group movement is its own form of you're crazy because there are hundreds of us and one of you. And I would say the vast majority of people fall into that category of, I don't know if I believe my own judgment because all these people can't be wrong. And Nemo says, Tony Baloney, hey man, middle finger is an art form, especially the double bias and Daniel Burr takes digital dexterity. That is true. Just about teachers. I have to go back and look. Trying to remember. I've shared so much of his stuff yesterday. Oh, the kind of people who are becoming teachers these days. Yes, I'm sure I saw it and I'm sure I also agreed with it. It's a completely different person than became teachers, 30, 40 years ago. And that's not to say that there are zero good people trying to become a teacher. Of course there are in every generation. The problem is they are not supported. They are not wanted. They are fish out of water. And if they don't leave within 5 years because they realize I am not in the right place and I can't do what I want to do, and this just goes against everything I stand for, they're drummed out. They're persecuted out. They're just abused out. So, yeah. And the administrators are awful. The administrators are worse. The administrators were as bad as the worst teacher is. Bad administrators are worse. Texas Sheep Lady says not a penny of government tainted money. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It was our money, but the second it left our hands and went to the government, it became their money. It became their money. And when it was commingled with our neighbors' money, it really almost, it's now wealth redistribution. Unless you get back dollar for dollar what you personally put in, you're getting a subsidy. So there's that. And then Texas Sheep Lady says they will be swimming up waterfalls constantly. That is true. They will. So that's what I have for you today. I am so grateful that you guys decided to spend some of your Memorial Day with me talking about the importance of American history, preserving it, and all of these things. I hope that if you're watching this and you're not already a subscriber to the channel, The Reason We Learn, that you will consider subscribing. I would love very, very much to make it to 16,000 subs soon. I've been hovering around 15.5 for so long, and I don't know why 16. My daughter's turning 16 next Monday, a week from today, and it would just be so cool if I somehow made it to 16,000 subs on her 16th birthday. So if you could spread the word and see if we can get more people to sub, I don't know. It just would be like really cool. I don't think I'm shadow banned, but I do a lot of long form content. Not a lot of people like that. They want like short stuff and it's kind of dense and heavy, and I don't make a lot of clips. And so I think that's part of it. But who knows? I hope people find value in it. And, I would like to have more people see it. So there's that. And if you are a parent who needs some actual support, I do have a support group at wokescreen.com. The Reason We Learn, if you go in there, there's also a community that you can choose from. You can do the Reason We Learn community or the Reason We Parent community, or both. And it's really a nominal monthly amount or annual. And then you have access to me at a dedicated call once a week on Sunday nights, or you can message me and ask me questions there. And those paying members get my attention. I'm trying to do that because I was getting DMs, messages, emails like every day. Can you look at this? Can you look at that? Is this a good school? Should I do that? Where's the woke in my school? And I'm like, so that's the best way to get to get hold of me is to become a member there. It's a Discord-based community, very private. I don't collect anything. I don't sell anything. I don't, it's except for the monthly fee, whatever. It's just come on in, hang out. You can use an alias. You don't even need to tell me who you are. I don't care. And your privacy will be protected. So, any case, last comment here. David says, I had a fantastic time breaking the reality of the red badge of courage to my English class. The teacher gave me an F for the semester for that. Really? Wow. Why an F? That's terrible. I mean, to fail you. That's not nice. Nomo, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Every little bit helps. So you guys, thank you. Spread the word and share the show. I hope you found some of these books valuable. Again, we have Cleo's Bastards. This is from Curtis McManus. We have The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. Very, very important book. If you are interested in education reform at all, you need to know the history of it. Otherwise, you end up sounding like some of the school choice boys. Anyway, and then, of course, the must read, Debunking Howard Zinn. It's honestly, you'll learn history from this too, but you'll also learn the history of how our American history got totally screwed up, because this is the guy. This is the bad guy right here. And then that last book was Why We Hate Us. And that is Dick Meyer. It's a good book. It's a little cheeky, and I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a pretty interesting, hard-hitting account of like why we in the West are so down on ourselves. I think he makes a lot of excellent points. Thank you, Adrian. I really appreciate it. And then, Texas Sheep Lady, I think she's talking to David, like no truth allowed. That's messed up. And, he says, because I opened their eyes to stand and deliver. Yep. People don't want the truth. You can't handle the truth. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a great night, and I will see you again on Monday, if not sooner. All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.